Hey guys, tonight we slip into something much less comfortable, like linen soaked in Nile humidity, and travel back to the sun-baked banks of ancient Egypt. Picture this: the air is thick with dust and sweet lotus perfume. A bronze mirror glints in the corner while the river gurgles softly just beyond the reeds. You're barefoot, your tunic is sticking to your back, and some priest is chanting in the background about fertility rituals while absently petting a sacred cat. This is not your high school history class. The reality of love, marriage, and intimacy in ancient Egypt is far more tangled, and oddly bureaucratic, than any Cleopatra drama might suggest. In fact, by the time you finish tonight's journey, you might start questioning whether you'd have even survived courtship without a notary, a list of acceptable ointments, and about 5 buckets of patience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while you're at it, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far we drift across the world at bedtime. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting by a flickering oil lamp in a mud brick home outside Thebes. It's around 1350 BCE, and the walls are cool to the touch. You've just helped someone prepare for marriage, by which we mean you've been roped into folding linen dowry clothes, carrying perfumed animal fat jars, and listening to the mother of the bride complain about her neighbor's goat chewing on their reed fence again. But the bride isn't nervous. Not really. She's practical. Because here, love isn't a prerequisite for marriage. Compatibility, however, that's essential. You don't want someone whose incense allergies disrupt temple offerings or who can't keep crocodiles out of the garden. Marriage contracts are common and shockingly detailed. You lean over one scratched onto a bit of ostrakhan, broken pottery used as scrap paper. It includes clauses for what happens if the husband skips town, how much bread the wife gets weekly, and who gets custody of the cat. There's no romantic flourish. No until death do us part. More like until you steal my beer rations or forget the laundry again. Still, you hear whispers, rumors that some couples do fall in love. Egyptians weren't devoid of emotion. In fact, love poems scratched into tomb walls speak of stolen glances, the scent of sweat beneath lotus flowers, and longing so fierce it might raise the dead. Literal poetry of longing lines the passageways of the elite. One fragment reads, "I passed by her door. My heart leapt like a fish in the river." Now, that's a feeling, but you'll need to hold your fishy heart for a moment. First, let's talk about contraception, because the Nile might flood reliably, but Egyptians weren't keen on flooding the house with children they couldn't feed. So, naturally, they got creative. You peek into a clay jar and nearly retch, someone's concocted another preventive measure from acacia gum, honey, and crocodile dung. Yes. That crocodile dung. Inserted as a pessary. Historians still argue whether it was symbolic, chemical, or just impressively brave, and it wasn't their only trick. There were suppositories made from sour milk and garlic, amulets blessed by priests, and incantations whispered during eclipses. Fertility was both a spiritual and physical realm. If someone wanted to conceive, they might visit a temple, pray to Hathor or Bes, a stubby lion dwarf who looks like a walking emoji, and offer dried figs. They might also rub their stomach with oils, consult a midwife priestess, or, if desperate, sleep with a fertility figurine under the bed, and beds. They're not soft. Most people slept on slanted stone pillows. Yes, pillows made of rock, shaped like an overachieving shoehorn. You'd need love strong enough to override. Back pain, nighttime was filled with small rituals. Women lined their eyes with kohl not just for style but to ward off evil spirits. You might watch someone recite verses about strength and balance before intimacy. Candles flicker. The air grows warm. But don't expect wild debauchery. Intimacy in ancient Egypt wasn't public, loud, or scandalous. It was rhythmically scheduled and spiritually grounded. Unless you were royalty, royalty. Now we get weird. You shift to the palace, and immediately everything is bigger, shinier, and vaguely incestuous. Pharaohs were semi-divine, and divine blood was to be kept pure, which sometimes meant marrying your sister, your niece, or someone whose family tree was basically a wreath. Cleopatra VII, yes, that Cleopatra, was the product of multiple generations of sibling marriage, and while her historical love life is legendary, her actual upbringing was more administrative. Palace intrigue often revolved around who could birth the most legitimate heir. Queen consorts competed with harem women, who in turn whispered alliances with palace servants. Harem life wasn't all scented baths and relaxing massages. You had guards, spies, and the constant anxiety of being demoted from concubine to unemployed. Still, some women held enormous power. Take Nefertiti, who possibly ruled as pharaoh herself under the name Neferneferuiten. Or Hatshepsut, who wore a ceremonial beard and outmaneuvered her male advisors. Their authority extended over temples, estates, and sometimes their own romantic agency. Maybe not in the way you'd want, freedom was never absolute, but far more than in many later societies. Outside the palace, Egyptian law surprisingly favored women. A wife could own property, initiate divorce, and sue her ex if he failed to deliver promised bread. Divorce was common, especially if someone forgot to be fruitful and multiply. But remarriage was just as quick. Egyptians weren't sentimental about endings. Life flowed. Like the Nile, sometimes branching, sometimes muddy, always moving forward. You wander past a weaver's stall and hear a mother warning her daughter, "Don't trust a man who brings only fish and not onions." Apparently, onions were the real love language. A fringed scroll from the village of Deir el-Medina, home of the artisans who carved tombs in the Valley of the Kings, details daily life and gossip. Affairs were common. So were love triangles, temple confessions, and occasional ghost sightings of angry exes. One letter complains of a husband who visited his other house too often. Another offers a casual, passive-aggressive curse, "May your beer turn sour and your sandals crack." And speaking of beer, it was the social lubricant of the age. Most Egyptians drank beer daily, it was safer than water. Festivities included public dancing, music, and flirtation. You spot a girl spinning in a sheer linen wrap, tossing her hair like she knows you're watching. She does. Courtship was often swift, gifts, songs, and then agreement. No candlelit dinners. No "where do you see this going?" text. Still, beneath the formality and rituals, you sense something tender. A husband gifting his wife a blue faience amulet. A woman sneaking date cakes into her lover's basket. A scribe writing his beloved's name with exaggerated flourishes, just a little extra ink to show he cares. Then you reach the tombs. They are not morbid. They're reverent. Love transcends death here. Many tomb inscriptions mention a desire to be reunited in the afterlife, forever holding hands in the field of reeds. One stela shows a couple seated side by side, eternally sharing bread and beer. The afterlife, as imagined by Egyptians, wasn't just divine judgment. It was companionship, comfort, and, hopefully, fewer mosquitoes, and yet, even in death, things were complicated. Mummies were sometimes buried with fertility symbols. Others had charms sewn into their wrappings to prevent unwanted advances in the afterlife. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic protection or a serious concern. Regardless, it shows just how much energy was devoted to managing intimacy, not just in life, but in eternity. As you lie back on the cool temple floor, you notice the ceiling stars. The sky goddess Nut stretches overhead, arching protectively over the world. Her presence is sensual, maternal, and cosmic. She swallows the sun at dusk and births it at dawn. She is the perfect emblem of Egyptian attitudes toward love, celestial, repetitive, and tinged with a hint of magic, you hear a priest finishing his prayer to Hathor, goddess of love and music. His voice is tired, almost sleepy. He ties off the scroll, snuffs the flame, and lets the temple fall silent, so you curl up under your borrowed linen, your thoughts still half tangled with crocodile dung, jealous goddesses, and the bureaucratic formality of the oldest romance contracts known to history. Tomorrow, you'll learn about aphrodisiacs involving fermented locusts. But for now, let the Nile carry you. You wake up to the faint sound of sandals scuffing across sun-warmed tiles. The scent of frankincense lingers in the air, mingling with something less pleasant, possibly goat sweat. You're in the courtyard of a modest villa, eye level with a bowl of crushed herbs and old oil, which is being reheated on a brazier by a woman humming off-key. She adds a generous spoonful of something brown. You recognize it instantly. Yep. Crocodile dung again. Welcome to the more intimate corner of ancient Egypt, where sex and self-care blur into ritual, habit, and sometimes horrifying improvisation. If Section 1 gave you the marriage contracts and tomb inscriptions, Section 2 offers the personal care drawer. Except here, that drawer is a clay box filled with resin, natron, animal fat, and a pungent mixture of perfume and paranoia. You've stumbled into the boudoir of a woman preparing for a visit. The papyrus scroll tucked in her wall niche isn't a love letter, it's a recipe. A list of herbs, oils, animal parts, and mystical diagrams aimed at increasing desire, warding off rivals, or simply masking the smell of living near a swamp. Perfumed ointments are the foundation of attraction. You watch her grind lotus petals and myrrh into sesame oil, stirring until the mixture glows amber in the morning sun. This isn't just about smelling nice. Fragrance was believed to align you with divine favor. After all, the gods themselves wore scented oil. At least, according to temple murals where Horus, falcon-headed and majestic, is having his armpits dabbed by a particularly focused priest, and this isn't just feminine vanity. Men had their own scent codes. A high-ranking scribe might splash on henna water or wear a cone of scented fat on his wig. These fat cones melted over the evening, leaving you glistening and fragrant by the time the dancing started. Unless it was summer, in which case, you were a human candle, you trail the woman as she applies kohl to her eyelids, not for seduction. Though it doesn't hurt, but to repel flies and spirits. The Eye of Horus isn't just a symbol. It's a how-to guide for mixing the right minerals, charcoal, and galena to highlight your spiritual and literal vision. It's makeup, medicine, and protection, all smudged with the same worn stick. When she finishes, she glances at her reflection in a polished bronze disc. No glass, no mirror. Just metal and confidence. Then she picks up a small clay figurine and whispers to it. You lean in. It's a love spell. Ancient Egyptians didn't trust attraction to chance. If you wanted someone's attention, you might hire a professional scribe to draft a love incantation. These were surprisingly poetic. One reads, "Let his heart be turned to me like the lotus to the sun." Another includes instructions to scatter the ashes in front of your beloved's door and to stand where their shadow falls. Historians still argue whether these spells were symbolic rituals or genuine attempts at romantic manipulation. But either way, they were common, and not gendered. Men and women alike sought magical assistance in matters of the heart and body. Your host steps into her courtyard where her neighbor is boiling barley beer. She trades a perfumed cloth for a handful of blue lotus pods, known in some circles as a mild narcotic. Chewed before sex or floated in wine, the lotus was thought to relax the body, elevate the mind, and soften inhibitions. Like ancient champagne with a side of light hallucinations, you follow the breeze through alleyways thick with gossip. Around the corner, a group of men are laughing over a satirical papyrus. You sneak a peek and blink. It's a drawing, crudely sketched but unmistakable, of animals engaged in very human behavior. One donkey appears to be reciting poetry. This scroll, known from real fragments found in Deir el-Medina, reveals the existence of bawdy humor and erotic cartoons in Egyptian society. Not exactly temple decor, but an insight into their layered approach to sexuality, reverent, practical, and deeply sarcastic when needed. Now, let's talk condoms. Or rather, the absence of them. While other cultures, centuries later, dabbled with linen or animal intestine sheaths, the Egyptians didn't seem too interested in external barriers. Instead, internal methods ruled. Pessaries made from honey, acacia, and, yes, dung. Some recipes even included sour milk, which contains lactic acid and might have had some antimicrobial properties. Whether they worked is uncertain. Whether they were comfortable, also uncertain, but if contraception was slightly terrifying, pregnancy rituals were full-on magical science. A common pregnancy test involved barley and emmer wheat. A woman would urinate on seeds for several days. If one sprouted, it meant she was pregnant. Which seed sprouted first was thought to reveal the baby's gender. Modern lab studies have shown a surprising degree of accuracy, possibly due to hormones like estrogen affecting seed growth. Ancient biohacking, childbirth itself was both sacred and hazardous. The goddess Taurit, depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus with lion limbs and crocodile tail, truly a fever dream of protection, was invoked constantly. Midwives doubled as ritual healers, and spells were chanted between contractions. Wooden birth bricks, flat surfaces for squatting, were painted with protective deities to encourage an easier delivery and fend off demon spirits. You wander toward a healing temple, where a priestess is whispering something over a small wax figure. Another love spell? No, this one's revenge. Egyptians had few taboos around invoking divine justice in intimate matters. If a lover strayed, a spell might call down bad dreams, impotence, or general social awkwardness. May his loin tremble like a boat in flood is an actual curse. Harsh, but intimacy wasn't all incense and hieroglyphs, there were social expectations. Class differences. Power plays, a wealthy man could take multiple wives, or more often. Have a wife and then a household of secondary women. These weren't hidden or shameful. They just existed within the hierarchy. Some were treated well, others poorly. Occasionally, one became favored and rose to power, but more often they existed in the administrative shadows, and then there were servants and slaves. Egypt had slavery, often through war or debt. Enslaved individuals had little to no agency. Some were absorbed into households and granted certain freedoms over time, others were used transactionally. It's one of the darker undercurrents of Egyptian social life, one that modern romanticism tends to ignore. Consent, in these cases, was likely non-existent. That said, ancient Egypt offered women, particularly free women, far more autonomy than many later civilizations. A woman could inherit land, initiate divorce, run a business, and testify in court. Even the phrase "my wife" wasn't possessive. It was hemet, meaning partner or equal. Language shaped perception, and perception shaped how roles were understood. You pass a scribe's workshop and overhear the copying of a famous love poem, "Your love has penetrated all within me, like honey sweetening all manner of herbs." It's almost gentle, almost modern. And yet buried within those lines is the eternal push and pull of desire, expectation, and hope. At a local feast, music plays. Lyres and flutes accompany dancers who wear thin linen and gold jewelry. One man performs acrobatics while balancing a tray of wine. Another woman sings softly about lost love while grinding spices. A young couple dances too closely for temple approval. But tonight, no one cares. The feast was more than a celebration, it was courtship. Young people eyed one another, shared gossip, and maybe slipped behind a pillar if the gods weren't watching. They always were, but sometimes they looked away. You look up. The stars above the Nile flicker faintly in the deep sky. Egyptians mapped the heavens with obsessive care, associating stars with fertility, rebirth, and guidance. The goddess Isis was said to breathe life into the dead. Osiris, her beloved, was pieced back together from death itself, though the myths do note that one rather important body part had to be recreated. Let that one sink in. Stories like these weren't just spiritual, they were frameworks. Templates for understanding longing, resurrection, devotion. Intimacy wasn't private, it was mirrored in myth. Echoed in temple rituals. Celebrated in poems. Cautioned in amulets, and that's what's quietly surprising. For a culture steeped in tradition, surrounded by death imagery, and worshipping animal-headed deities, ancient Egypt understood how fragile and vital connection could be. Whether through perfume jars, spell scrolls, or late-night songs drifting from a feast, they kept intimacy close, ritualized but alive. You return to the villa as the oil lamp burns low. The woman from earlier lies in the soft glow of lotus-scented air. Her companion is beside her now, tracing symbols absent-mindedly into her palm. They speak softly, not about love or eternity, but whether the neighbor's barley crop will hold, because even in this world of crocodile charms and goddess chants, the quietest moments are always the most human. The morning sun scrapes over whitewashed walls, and the Nile murmurs like it's got secrets to keep. You roll over on a woven mat still warm from sleep and blink up at the painted ceiling beams, stylized blue lotuses and faded stars. The air tastes like dust and yesterday's incense. You've slept in a craftsman's home, in a village not far from the Valley of the Kings, where artisans carve tombs for the elite and pen love poems for themselves. You rise and stretch, bones cracking like papyrus scrolls unrolling, and pad across the room. On a shelf above the door, a row of clay figurines watches you with oddly judgmental expressions. They're charms. Maybe for fertility. Maybe for protection. Maybe just there because someone's mother said they should be. It's time we talk about love that lingers even after death. You step outside into the dusty street, and the tombs loom in the distance like half-buried ships. Egyptians believed death was not the end, it was a continuation. A second act, ideally a better one. But only if you passed judgment, remembered your name, and had someone on earth whispering spells in your favor. And if you were lucky, you didn't go into that second act alone, you strolled toward the nearest tomb, past stone columns carved with cartouches and scenes of daily life. One mural shows a man fishing while his wife offers him lotus flowers. Not dramatic. Not mythic. Just domestic intimacy in pigment. Eternalized not in grandeur, but in the quiet routines of love. Inside the tomb's cool belly, you spot inscriptions curling across the walls, love poetry disguised as prayers, or maybe the other way around. In one tomb of a scribe named Sennacherib, he and his wife are pictured side by side, gazing at each other with identical smirks. The inscription reads, "He made her heart to live." They didn't ask for eternity separately. They asked for it together. In ancient Egypt, to be remembered was to live again. Names, carved and spoken, kept spirits tethered to the afterlife. And names paired, husband and wife, lover and beloved, meant that your soul didn't walk the fields of reeds alone. Even pharaohs weren't immune to this desire. Ramses II wrote adoring lines to Nefertari, his queen, "My love is unique, no one can rival her. Just by passing, she has stolen my heart." You wouldn't think that a man with dozens of wives and concubines would bother writing poetry. But apparently, even sun gods need a muse. You trail your fingers along the wall, tracing hieroglyphs etched 3,000 years ago. The air feels still, almost reverent. You're not the first to read these words. But you might be the first in centuries to imagine what their private moments felt like, the pauses between duty and devotion. Not every tomb is this romantic. You reach one where a woman's name has been chiseled out. Someone didn't want her remembered. The reasons are lost: jealousy, betrayal, politics, or just plain pettiness. But the erasure is sharp, cruel. You step back, feeling a chill, because in this culture, deletion was the ultimate punishment. Worse than execution. To die was one thing. To be forgotten was a kind of spiritual annihilation. Even an annoying ex got their name tucked into a corner somewhere. Total removal. That meant something personal. You wander back toward the village of Deir el Medina, the workers' settlement, perched above the valley like a whispering little hive. This place is unusually well documented. Because these tomb artists were literate, their gossip was immortalized. Ostraca, the broken pottery shards they used like sticky notes, preserve records of workplace feuds, love affairs, and borrowing someone's food offering from the temple pantry. One shard reads, "I love her though she beats me, though she has no eyebrows, though she lives far." That's commitment. Possibly poor judgment, but definitely commitment. Another tells of a man who kept 2 women in separate homes and was very bad at scheduling. A domestic argument broke out during festival season, right in front of a statue of Hathor. Not ideal. You pause at a shrine where a woman has left a small dish of bread, sun-dried dates, and a half-burned incense stick. She's praying for her dead husband. Or maybe for a lover who never came back from the mines. Maybe both. Love, in this culture, often blurred across marriage lines, especially when life was short and uncertain. Historians still argue whether Egyptian monogamy was the social norm or just the public mask. Official records suggest marriage was typically 1-to-1. But letters, art, and temple records suggest a wide berth of reality. Affairs weren't unheard of. Polyamory wasn't scandalous. But discretion? Always advisable. Especially if your rival had access to cursing rituals and an enthusiastic priest. Back in town, a midwife is preparing for a birth. You slip into her shaded room and notice the walls are decorated with cheerful stick figures, mothers, babies, and vaguely phallic deities making everything weird. The midwife doesn't blink. She's seen it all. She's delivered twins under eclipses, breech births in granaries, and once helped a woman give birth while holding a scroll of erotic hymns. Birth, like death, was never just a biological event, it was metaphysical. Women sang during labor. They swore. They invoked Hathor, Taurit, and Isis. Sometimes all 3 at once. There are records of husbands being forcibly ejected from the room for making unhelpful comments like "just relax." And when the baby arrived, so did amulets. Clay hippos, bronze eyes, a painted feather to weigh the infant's soul. One mother whispers that she named her baby after a dream. A god came to her, wearing a lion mask and holding a lotus. Or maybe it was just a neighbor's cat, and the heat was getting to her. You step out into the daylight and follow a narrow path past the butcher's stall and a papyrus vendor. A pair of teenagers flirt over baskets of figs. He offers her the best one, then pulls it back, grinning. She throws a date pit at his face. True affection, in any century, it's not all coy glances and lotus flowers, though. You overhear a trial being held in the courtyard. A woman has accused her neighbor of stealing her husband through magical means. A papyrus scroll is presented as evidence, covered in odd symbols and drawings of hands, eyes, and frogs. The judge sighs. The crowd murmurs. Everyone knows the neighbor's been eyeing that man for weeks. Still, proving enchantment is tricky. Magical thinking was deeply interwoven with daily life. You might wear an amulet to increase libido. You might curse someone's armpits to make them less attractive. One spell involves placing a cooked goose liver under someone's threshold and reciting 48 syllables of divine gibberish. Another suggests mixing your toenail clippings into beer. Romance was never just emotional, it was strategic. Egyptians used love letters like currency. And yes, those letters survived. One says, "I dream of your face at the water's edge." Another reads, "Come to me when the moon hides its eye." You imagine someone leaning against a stone wall, scratching these lines into papyrus with their heart thumping louder than the nearby drumbeat. You also find letters of heartbreak. A woman begs her former lover to return her comb and her dignity. He does neither. She writes a second letter to the gods instead. You pass a couple sitting on a blanket, sharing dried fish and beer. He's gently removing thorns from her sandal strap. Not a grand gesture. Just one of those quiet moments that feels eternal. Then there's the temple district, where love gets lofty. Here, the gods model behaviors that range from romantic to deeply confusing. Isis and Osiris are the gold standard, devoted, tragic, resurrected. Set and Nephthys. Complicated. Batet, the cat goddess, stands for fertility, sensuality, and occasional random acts of clawing. Bes, the aforementioned emoji lion dwarf, is a household protector but also a cheerleader for bedroom fun. His statue often stood in sleeping quarters, tongue out, eyes wide, hands raised like he's at a concert. You walk by a fresco where lovers are shown embracing under Nut's arched body, stars dotting her skin. They're tiny figures in the great cosmic expanse, and yet deeply grounded, human, tender, unshaven, and now the breeze shifts, carrying music from a boat on the river. A festival is underway, boats bob along the Nile, strung with papyrus garlands. Women wear flower crowns and float palm fronds across the water. Young men strut near the banks, pretending not to look at the girls who are definitely pretending not to look back. It's the festival of drunkenness, dedicated to Hathor. You're told it commemorates the time Hathor almost destroyed humanity, then got drunk and changed her mind. It's unclear what this says about love, but everyone's tipsy and smiling, so maybe that's the point. As the sun dips low, turning the water gold, you spot two figures slipping away behind a pillar. She giggles. He nearly trips on a sandaled foot. You hear whispers of old lines passed between lovers for centuries. My heart is not yet complete until yours rests beside it. You lean against a column, warm from the sun, cool from the shadow. You think about tombs and spell scrolls, about figs and fragrances, about how something so old can still feel so familiar. Egyptians wrapped love in layers of ceremony, myth, and perfume. But under all that, it was still about being seen, being wanted, being remembered. And for all the incense and crocodile-based contraception, maybe that's what mattered most, someone whispering your name long after you've gone. Evening descends over the Nile in soft amber hues. The river reflects back a sky smeared with rose and gold, and every breeze feels like a whispered story. You stand on a wooden dock beside a ceremonial boat, nothing grand, just curved planks, papyrus lashings, and a faint scent of fish oil clinging to its hull. You've drifted further north, toward the delta, where reeds are thicker, accents are different, and everything seems just a little wetter. Tonight, your destination isn't a tomb or a perfumed bedroom. It's the open courtyards of Minoan palaces. Because while Egyptian love was slow-burning and perfumed, the Minoans, those mysterious sea traders from Crete, had their own ideas about intimacy. Ideas painted in ochre, immortalized in frescoes, and surrounded by more dolphins than you'd expect. You arrive in Knossos, a palace complex that is part maze, part temple, and part vibrant party venue. You're surrounded by walls painted with crimson, cobalt, and lapis lazuli, colors so vivid it feels like the walls might pulse if you stare long enough. And on those walls, people. Beautiful, ambiguous people. Lean bodies in movement, fluid lines of dancers and athletes and nobles. Some figures are clearly male. Others clearly female. Many. Deliberately both, or neither. The air smells of crushed herbs and beeswax. You pass a column wider at the top than the base, painted red. The floor tiles beneath your feet are smooth from centuries of barefoot footsteps. You hear laughter echoing from a side chamber where musicians play on pipes and lyres, and someone nearby drops a basket of pomegranates, curses softly, then laughs too. Unlike in Egypt, where gender roles, while flexible in some areas, were generally structured, the Minoan world seems to revel in fluidity. You sit beneath a painted scene of two lithe youths leaping over a bull, hands outstretched, legs tucked like dancers mid-flight. Historians still argue whether this was an athletic competition, a rite of passage, or a slightly dangerous date night. No matter the answer, the symbolism is hard to ignore. In this world, intimacy often carried the language of ritual. Physical strength and beauty were celebrated equally in all genders. Jewelry wasn't gendered. Perfume wasn't political. And frescoes didn't care whether your limbs matched the standard silhouettes. The human body, in all its variety, was worthy of pigment and celebration. You wander into a private room, a sanctuary of sorts. The air is cooler here. A bowl of olive oil sits on a low shelf. You watch as someone anoints their skin with it, then smooths their hair back, not out of vanity, but because tonight is important. Tonight, they're meeting someone beneath the moonlit balcony. Beside the sacred olive tree, the Minoans didn't leave behind detailed written records of their romantic lives. Their script, linear A, remains largely undeciphered. What we have are images and artifacts. A gold seal showing two figures embraced beneath a crescent moon. A carved plaque of a woman offering fruit while another plays a lyre. A collection of ceremonial cups too small for practicality, possibly used for symbolic toasts, or something far more intimate. This is the challenge and the charm, we're swimming in symbols. Historians debate their meaning endlessly. Was that ceremonial robe meant to seduce or sanctify? Was that fresco a depiction of a religious rite or a playful flirtation between dancers? The lack of textual clarity leaves room for something deliciously uncertain, an invitation to imagine. And so you imagine two lovers meeting in a quiet grove after a harvest festival. Their fingers sticky with fig juice, laughter catching in their throats as they whisper the Minoan equivalent of "I missed you." You imagine a temple priestess with a spiral tattoo on her forearm, blessing a union between two people whose names never made it into the archaeology books. You imagine intimacy unfolding not in secrecy or shame, but in celebration. Of course, it wasn't all euphoric, power still shaped desire. The elite dined in airy courtyards, surrounded by dancers and pouring from carafes of sweet, fermented honey wine. Lower classes worked the fields, spun the wool, and scrubbed the floors of those palaces. Relationships crossed class lines, yes, but not always without consequence. If you loved too high, or too low, you risked more than gossip. You risked being exiled from the very courtyard you once danced in. You pass by an offering table strewn with bits of bread, dried herbs, and the dried tail of a lizard, for luck, presumably. A fresco above it shows two women standing side by side, hands barely touching. Expression serene. Their dresses are elaborate, tiered, flounced, with open bodices. They wear layered necklaces and spiraled hair. There's no man between them. No child. Just the two of them, frozen in pigment, gazing out at you. Some scholars claim they're sisters. Others say they're priestesses. A few wonder, quietly, if they were something more. And you? You just smile. Because in a society where roles blurred and art didn't flinch from ambiguity, maybe that question was never meant to be answered definitively. The moon rises higher, illuminating the palace in silver. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard. A couple steps into view. One wears a tunic with embroidered dolphins. The other wears none at all. They pour oil into a shallow bowl and light it. The flame dances, flickering low as they sit, knee to knee, exchanging stories and dates plucked from a nearby basket. It's not a ceremony. It's not a drama. It's just closeness. Later, you find yourself in a smaller chamber. The walls here are quieter, fewer scenes of leaping athletes or celebrants. Instead, faint spiral motifs wind along the borders, repeating and repeating. You sit. Someone hands you a cup. You sip. It's bitter, sweet, unfamiliar. The herbs are strong, maybe for pleasure, maybe for fertility, maybe both. A soft drumbeat begins somewhere above. A slow, steady rhythm that pulls like a tide. You lie back against woven pillows and listen. The couple outside the door speaks softly, half laughing, half sighing. You catch phrases like "too much wine" and "the stars are closer tonight." And you start to believe them, because the Minoans, despite all that mystery, knew how to create moments of intimacy that ripple across centuries. They didn't write it down. They painted it into plaster, slipped it into jewelry, baked it into clay figurines. They left no instruction manual, no official doctrine. Just hints. Spirals. Olive oil lamps. A bull mid-leap. A hand on a shoulder, and that's why you're still thinking about them. Long after the music fades. Because they gave us an image of desire that wasn't boxed in. It was fluid. Shared. Sincere. You return to the threshold of the palace just as the first hints of dawn stain the horizon. Someone snoring behind a column. Another figure walks barefoot across the stones, cradling a bowl of fruit like a trophy from the night before. You look back at the courtyard, now empty but still echoing with ghost music. The dancers are gone, the moon is fading, but the feeling lingers, that perhaps once, in a time before time, people loved without fear of naming it, and even if they didn't leave us words, they left us something better, the silence to fill in for ourselves. Instead, you take a slow lap through the palace grounds one more time, drawn by the smell of rain on sun-baked clay and the faint hum of insects waking in the garden. The stillness is its own kind of music, no lyres now, just a drip of dew from ivy vines and the creak of ropes from boats docked in the cove below. In the garden, half covered by wild thyme, you find a small stone bench nestled between two olive trees. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, is a symbol, two intertwined spirals, like twin currents that never quite merge but endlessly follow. Not an official script. Not a state seal. Just a mark. Someone sat here once, maybe two someones, and left a sign behind, too small for a museum catalog but large enough to outlast them both. You run your hand over the surface, and it's smoother than you expect. Polished by use, not design. Perhaps lovers met here night after night. Or perhaps someone returned alone, remembering. That's the truth about ancient intimacy, it's quieter than history books make room for. Not always painted in grand murals. Sometimes it's just fingertips on stone, or two breathless figures sitting close enough to hear each other blink, so you stay a little longer. Watch the first sunbeams catch on distant waves. Hear a door creak open as someone rises to sweep yesterday from their doorstep, and before you go, you press your own hand briefly to that worn spiral, not to claim it, but to acknowledge it. Whatever their names were, they mattered enough to mark the world. The sun is hot again. Too hot, really. You've barely stepped off the boat and already your skin feels like it's turning into linen-wrapped papyrus. Dust clings to your shins as you trudge into a settlement that seems to rise straight out of the ochre earth. You're in the Levant now, ancient Canaan, where the soil is cracked, the houses are squat, and the air is thick with spice and suspicion. This isn't Egypt. And it's definitely not Crete. Here, in the early Iron Age world of city-states and tribal confederations, love isn't perfumed or painted on palace walls. It's shouted across courtyards. It's bargained for in front of goat pens. It's inked into contracts and clawed into legend. You've wandered into a world where affection exists, but it fights to survive against law, land, and lineage. You settle near a communal oven, where a group of women are baking barley bread. Their bangles clink as they slap dough against hot stone. One of them is singing, not softly, but with lungs full of fire. A work song, sure. But if you listen closely, the lyrics flirt. Something about stolen fruit and sandals kicked off under fig trees. A younger woman catches your eye and smirks. The implication is ancient and universal. We know what we're singing about. The world here is harsher, drier, and more fragmented. Where Egypt had unified rule and Minoan art sang of fluidity. Canaan is a patchwork quilt of customs and creeds. In one town, men can take multiple wives. In another, marriage is strictly monogamous. In one valley, daughters are property. In another, they inherit land. Everything depends on the tribe, the town, the local priest's mood, and how recently the last drought hit. You find yourself watching a courtship in progress, a man with a crooked beard offering a handful of pomegranates to a young woman drawing water from a well. He speaks confidently, but she answers without turning around. Her body language says she'll consider it. Maybe. If he brings dates next time. Good ones. And yet, for all the rough edges, there's tenderness here too. You stumble across an old song preserved in cuneiform script, likely from Ugarit. It's written in syllabic wedges, hard to decipher, but the rhythm of longing pulses even across languages. I call you like the wind calls the reeds, bend toward me, beloved, before the night. It's not just poetry. It's a spell. Words like these were often inscribed onto clay tablets, wrapped in linen, and buried under doorways. To attract a partner. To keep one. Or sometimes, to make someone regret leaving, you drift toward a town square, where you hear two women arguing. It's not violent, just heated. They're negotiating marriage terms with a third woman sitting cross-legged and entirely unbothered. She must be the matchmaker. A local legend, if tone and jewelry are any indication. She eventually raises one hand and all voices fall silent. She lists the bride's assets, a small vineyard, weaving skills, and a singing voice blessed by Baal himself. The groom, it seems, owns 3 donkeys and has promised to build a new roof. The mother of the bride frowns. The father hasn't spoken. He just tightens the cord around his waist, mutters, and stares at his sandals. Marriage in this region isn't just romantic. It's logistical. Emotional compatibility is nice, but land, water rights, and lineage carry more weight. Especially among the nomadic groups, where alliances could mean survival. To love without practicality is to risk hunger. To marry without strategy is to tempt the wrath of both your gods and your aunt, and yet, you feel it again. That softness beneath the sand. A fragment of Akkadian text from nearby Mari tells of a king who wrote to his wife while away at war, I have eaten, but it was not sweet. I have drunk, but it did not satisfy. Come to me. My heart is empty without you. That's not politics. That's yearning. Even monarchs missed home. Of course, intimacy had rules. Sometimes carved in stone. Hammurabi's code, from neighboring Babylon, outlines punishments for adultery, deception, and false accusations. These laws often favored men, but not always. Women could leave abusive husbands. They could demand dowries returned. They could testify in court. Not common everywhere, but possible. You keep that in mind as you watch a young girl listen closely to her grandmother's hushed advice. Something about husbands who snore and how to withhold stew until they stop. You pass a shrine nestled between 2 fig trees. Small, humble, with an offering bowl containing a single carnelian bead. A local fertility goddess, her name long forgotten, smiles in faded paint. Behind the shrine, etched into stone, is a list of wishes. Some ask for children. Some ask for health. One simply says, let her look at me again. You sit with that one for a while, because the people here didn't have the monumental tombs of Egypt or the labyrinthine murals of the Minoans. They had the in-between spaces. The back walls. The things whispered between basket and oven. You venture into a household as night falls. A family gathers for dinner, lentils, flatbread, dried apricots. The father jokes with his wife, the children mimic him. You notice a moment, blink and you'd miss it, where his hand brushes hers as they sit. Not scripted. Not ritualized. Just, real, later, the woman tells you that she was 15 when she married. That she didn't know him. That she expected duty, not warmth. But that he surprised her. That he listens. That he sometimes brings back wild thyme just because she likes the smell. You lie awake on the roof under the stars. There's no canopy here, no perfume. Just the open air and the quiet sound of sheep shifting in their pen. You think about how love, in this place, grows sideways. Slowly. Like roots beneath stones. Not showy, but strong. The next day, you're invited to a wedding. It's not ornate. No silk. No gold. Just a gathering. People wear their best linen, carry jugs of date wine, and sing the same songs their ancestors sang to the drumbeat of resilience. The couple stands beneath an awning of woven reeds. There's no priest. Just a grandfather who declares that this union will hold if they want it to. The bride grins. The groom blushes. The goats bleat, someone tosses almonds, and later, as the sun sets and the fire pits glow, the two of them sneak away behind a fig tree. You catch a glimpse of fingers intertwined, of shoulders touching in the dark. It's not grand. It's not painted into stone. But it's theirs, and in this place, that's more than enough. Before you leave the Levant, you stop at a way station, half inn, half shrine. A traveler sits nearby, composing a letter in Aramaic. He's writing to someone he calls my second breath. You wonder how long it will take for that letter to arrive. Or if it ever will, but the words matter. The attempt matters, because love, here and now, is not about permanence. It's about effort. Presence. Proximity. A shared meal. A borrowed scarf. A moment of laughter during barley harvest, and even in a landscape so dry it cracks, affection finds a way to bloom. You linger a little longer beneath the awning of the way station, lulled by the creak of leather water bags and the low humming of a lullaby from a nearby tent. The sky above the hills deepens to indigo, and the stars begin their nightly procession. Slow and blinking. Someone stokes a fire, and the smoke rises like a slow ribbon toward the gods. A boy not yet 10 approaches the traveler writing the letter. He's barefoot, carrying a twig and a crust of bread. He sits beside the older man without speaking. After a while, the traveler leans down and murmurs something. The boy grins, writes a small squiggle into the dirt, then blows on it as if sending a message skyward. They both laugh, and just like that, you realize, it's not the monumental gestures that last. Not always the weddings or contracts or scrolls. It's these. The shared silences. The small kindnesses. The warmth passed from palm to palm across thousands of years. You think of the wish carved behind the shrine, let her look at me again. It never made it into a scroll. It's not cited by scholars. But it endured. In chipped stone. In memory. In rhythm, and that's the truth ancient Canaan leaves you with, that love is less about loud declarations and more about weathering the years together. Surviving the sandstorms, hauling water, mourning losses, celebrating small wins, and still finding time to touch a shoulder and mean it. You watch the fire's glow reflect in the water jugs, and then in the traveler's eyes, and finally in your own memory, in this world. Love is not perfect. It doesn't try to be. It's just there, quiet, persistent, and profoundly human. You arrive before dawn. The air is cool, still, like it's holding its breath. Around you rise the sloped rooftops and slatted windows of ancient Jerusalem, or rather, of a city that will one day become Jerusalem. Right now, it's a hilltop stronghold of stone and prayer, goat pens and barley silos, ruled by shifting tribal alliances and watched over by 1,000 contradictory laws, gods, and family elders who believe sex should be either sacred or invisible, or both. You settle on a step outside the city gates as the sun peeks over olive groves. Two shepherds argue over who owns a stubborn ram. In the distance, a woman draws water from a well with a strength that says she's carried too many jars for too many people, for too many years. This is a land where intimacy is regulated by rhythm. By ritual. By restraint. Here, desire exists, but it must behave itself. You're in the realm of the early Israelites. The Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh, is still in formation, transmitted orally, its stories passed around fires and scribbled on parchments by men squinting in lamplight. And these stories? They're not shy. They're packed with love, longing, lust, betrayal. And more bedroom drama than any divine text has any right to contain. You begin to hear the oldest verses whispered by someone just outside the wall. Not commandments or lamentations, but a song. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. The Song of Songs. Or Shir HaShirim. A text so sensuous, so frankly erotic, that later rabbis had to insist, loudly, that it was merely allegory. Symbolism. God's love for Israel. Definitely not just two humans caught in a thunderstorm of attraction. Nope. Nothing to see here, but you read on. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine, your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. It's poetry wrapped in metaphor. It's language stretched to accommodate longing that can't be plainly spoken. And that's a theme here, across the highlands and desert paths of ancient Israelite life. Affection must weave itself around laws, around purity codes, around a community always listening. You walk into a family compound, 3 generations living beneath one roof, or at least, one courtyard. Chickens scratch the ground. An aunt mutters about someone's skirt being too short. A father negotiates a bride price with his cousin. Love here is negotiated. Arranged. Delivered like figs in a basket, whether ripe or not, marriage is expected. But love? That's a bonus, and intimacy. That must be earned. Not assumed. A bride enters her husband's household not just as a partner, but often as a stranger. The bedding ceremony might be observed by family members, proof of consummation, signaled with a bloodied sheet. You can almost feel your modern sensibilities curling in discomfort, but it wasn't always cruel. Or unfeeling. Once the spectacle ended, privacy was permitted. Even cherished, a woman tells you in hushed tones that her husband, though chosen by her father, now braids her hair before bed. That he learned her rhythms slowly. That after the 3rd barley season, she started to smile when he approached, and this society, so obsessed with law, did, at times, carve space for gentleness. In Deuteronomy, the rulebook of the Israelites, there's a commandment that says if a man takes a new wife, he is exempt from war or labor for 1 year, so he may bring happiness to his wife. Not duty. Not fertility. Happiness, and in that rare breath of tenderness, you catch something precious, a law that protects affection. You move from household to temple. Here, things are stricter. Intimacy is regulated not just by custom, but by ritual purity. After menstruation, a woman must wait 7 clean days before immersion in a mikveh, a ritual bath. Only then can she return to her husband. It's easy to read this as control. And in many ways, it is. But for some women, this rhythm became a calendar of anticipation. The cycle of distance, immersion, reunion. Some described the return as like first love again. Others, particularly those burdened with endless pregnancies, dreaded the green light. You peek inside a scrollmaker's hut, where 2 students copy the Psalms. They pause to laugh about something, probably a chicken, possibly a teacher. One of them pulls out a folded note from his sash. He reads it silently. Smiles. Tucks it back in. You'll never know what it says, because private affection here often hides in the margins. In metaphors. In shared olives, in help with the evening chores. Open flirtation is discouraged. But coded language flourishes. A shepherd boy once carved "You are my myrtle" into a fig tree. Another left a slingshot and 3 pebbles on a doorstep, the same gifts David used to win a heart and a kingdom. Historians still argue whether ancient Israelite society was prudish or just private. Archaeological finds reveal amulets with erotic inscriptions. At the same time, prophets thundered against temple prostitutes and foreign rituals involving fertility rites and sacred sexuality. You see the tension. A culture defining itself through moral laws, and constantly being seduced by its neighbors' looser boundaries. Still, within the home, love found cracks to seep through. You listen to a grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to weave flax. She speaks of her late husband with a grin. He snored like an ox but made lentil stew better than anyone. I'd wake up just to watch him stir it. Another woman, pressed by her mother to marry a cousin, whispers to you later, "There's a boy who brings firewood. If I look at him too long, the bread burns." Desire isn't gone. It just keeps its voice low. You move into a different quarter. Here, poorer families live in close quarters. There's less room for privacy, and fewer options for choice. But you notice that even among hardship, moments bloom. A couple argues in the street, loud, theatrical, ending in silence. A few minutes later, she's handing him a bowl of dates without speaking. He eats them slowly, eyes on hers. Something shifts. No mural. No poem. Just forgiveness. You walk through a field at dusk. 2 shepherds are lying on their backs, staring at the stars. One tells the other that he's scared of thunder. The other shrugs. "Then I'll be nearby when it comes." It isn't a declaration. It's a promise, and in a society where words had to walk a tightrope, promises often spoke louder than poetry. You find a love letter buried beneath a collapsed home from Lake-ish. The ink is faded, but the message still sings, "My eyes grow tired from seeking you." It's unsigned. Likely never sent. But someone took the time to write it. That matters. You end your day at the marketplace, where chaos reigns. A merchant haggles over dates. A woman throws a sandal at a boy who stole her fish. A young man plays a flute beneath a fig tree, badly, but a girl nearby pretends not to hear him, then lingers anyway. And isn't that love, too? In this world of laws and longing, of prophets and scrolls, love is the intermission. The joke whispered in the synagogue. The fig passed under the table. The wedding song that starts out sacred and slowly becomes a rhythm you sway to, and when you finally curl up under a wool blanket beside a smoldering fire, you remember that even in a world written by men with laws and ledgers, love keeps finding loopholes, even if it has to write them in the margins. Night deepens, and the city quiets. You hear only distant sheep bells now, and the occasional thud of a rooftop jug being refilled by moonlight. Somewhere, a woman sings a lullaby to a child who won't sleep. The melody is slow, slightly off-key, but soothing in the way only lullabies can be. And in her voice, there's something else, something not just maternal. A weariness, perhaps. Or the echo of another lullaby once sung to her by someone now long gone. You think of how intimacy echoes across generations, hidden in gestures. A hand on a child's shoulder. A bit of honey is saved in a jar. A story repeated not for its content, but for its comfort. By the fire, a young scribe stirs from his sleep. He pulls out a thin piece of parchment and begins to write, not scripture, not law, but something else. Something quieter. It begins, "I thought I could forget you, but I still look for your shadow in the olive grove." He stops, folds the parchment, tucks it under his head, and sleeps again. You won't know if the letter is for a woman or a man, if it's a love returned or lost. But you understand that the yearning is real, that it lingers, even when unspoken, because here, in a culture that so often demanded silence around the body still found ways to speak. In glances. In pauses. In whispered songs and half-smiles passed between stone walls, you lie down again, blanket pulled to your chin, warmed by the glow of a dying ember, and you realize, even in a city where desire is hemmed in by law, ritual, and watchful eyes, it still stirs, not loudly. Not always safely, but it stirs. And that, just like the ember beside you, is enough to keep the night alive. You wake to the sound of cowbells and sandals slapping dust. The horizon is red with early morning sun, and the scent in the air is barley mash, sweat, and rising bread. You're no longer in the stony highlands of ancient Israel. You've traveled northeast, past the rivers of Babylon, beyond Nineveh, and now find yourself in a Mesopotamian town where even the breeze seems older than memory. This is the land between the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. The cradle of civilization, the domain of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. This is where humans first carved symbols into wet clay to record barley bushels and bedfellows. Where gods kept lists of your sins and your kisses. Where even desire was organized into archives. You step into a market courtyard just as it opens. Vendors call out over their carts of onions, fish, and incense. A group of children chase each other past a priestess holding a shallow bowl of blood-colored wine. A temple looms nearby, its steps wide, its purpose confusing to the modern eye. But to the ancients, that temple was more than a place of worship. It was where heaven and earth flirted over fruit baskets and firstborn sons. You've heard the term sacred prostitution whispered before. It appears in Greek sources, although modern scholars debate whether those accounts were misunderstood or exaggerated. Still, there's no doubt that temples in ancient Mesopotamia often housed priestesses, called Nadatu or Kadistu, who performed rituals of fertility and union. Were those rituals literal or symbolic? Historians still argue whether the sexual acts described were sacred offerings or Greek imagination run wild, but you slip inside the temple anyway, bare feet on sun-warmed stone. Inside, you hear a woman's voice chant softly in Akkadian. She's adorned in linen dyed with indigo, strands of beads hanging from her arms like sunlight caught in strings. She sprinkles oil over a small statue of Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and everything messy in between, Inanna, who descended into the underworld for passion. Inanna, who turned men to wolves when they failed to please her. Inanna, who blessed unions and destroyed them just as easily. She is not gentle. She is not modest. She is desire carved into divine muscle. You find a clay tablet near the altar, its edges crumbling, but its message enduring. It's a hymn. From over 4,000 years ago. A woman speaks, bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet, lion, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet. Yes, that's an ancient Sumerian love poem. Yes, it's about sex. And yes, it's incredibly enthusiastic. You sit with that for a moment. This is not the subtle glance across a courtyard. This is not a carved spiral hidden beneath a fig tree. This is a shout. A public declaration of affection, lust, devotion, all rolled into clay syllables and sung aloud during ceremonies, because here in Mesopotamia, love could be both public and poetic. People wrote about it, prayed for it, fought over it, and petitioned the gods to help them do it better. You watch a merchant's wife pour water over her husband's hands. She dries them carefully with her shawl. He says nothing, but smiles. Later, he'll return with saffron tucked into his sleeve, her favorite. This is how affection moves here, quietly practical, tender beneath layers of formality. Outside the temple, in the bustling residential quarter, you pass by a wedding procession. Not the lavish kind, just neighbors following a couple down an alley, drums clapping in time, children tossing lentils at their feet. The bride wears thick kohl around her eyes. The groom's hands shake as he adjusts his belt. It's sweet. And slightly terrifying. Everyone's watching. A woman nearby tells you that once married, the bride will move in with her husband's family. She'll be expected to manage the household, raise children, oversee servants if she's lucky. The marriage contract, signed in the presence of elders, lists expectations, dowries, and penalties. But it might also mention affection, gifts, even poetry. You peek at a preserved contract written in Old Babylonian. Alongside the list of goats and silver mina is this: if he takes another wife, he shall not lessen her food, clothing, or her conjugal rights. That last part. Her conjugal rights, not his. Hers, that's right. Ancient Mesopotamian law protected a woman's claim to physical intimacy within marriage. And if that right was denied, she could petition for separation, or take her complaint to the city elders, who might fine the husband in barley or beer. You wander into a schoolhouse where young scribes practice cuneiform on wax tablets. One boy, no older than 10, scratches out a sentence. The instructor squints, corrects his spacing, and sends him back. You lean over and read the line: when I see her, my heart dances like the reeds in the wind. You smile. Because here, love starts early. It's taught in the same breath as geometry and grammar. It's etched into education. You think of all the clay tablets lost to flood, to fire, to conquest, and how many of them carried poems like this: at dusk, you enter a home, 3 rooms, a courtyard, a rooftop garden where figs grow in clay pots. A mother sets down dinner: stewed lentils, flatbread, fish seasoned with garlic. Her husband washes her feet with warm water from a copper jug. Their children giggle at the sight. She smirks at you and says, it's tradition, when the figs are ripe, he must do something sweet. You ask if she loves him. She shrugs, then nods, and you see that love here is layered. Not always flowery. Sometimes it's just the absence of cruelty. Sometimes it's a hand rubbed with sesame oil. Or a lullaby hummed out of habit. Later that night, you climb to the rooftop and lie on a reed mat. The stars are thick as barley in a granary. Beside you, an elderly couple sits in silence. He leans his head on her shoulder. She doesn't move. Just rests her cheek lightly on his hair. It's not performance. Not ritual, just years of fig harvests and temple feasts. Years of arguing about garlic. Years of watching your children outgrow your lap. Years of remembering what your husband looked like when he first stammered through a love poem about your eyes, because here in Mesopotamia, love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to last, and sometimes it does. Sometimes it's buried with you, on a clay tablet tucked into your hand, etched with a single line: may she walk beside me again in the next life. You stay up later than you should. The rooftop breeze is cool now, the smells of the day replaced by night jasmine and cooling bread. The sky glimmers above you with a sharpness you don't see in modern skies. You imagine someone lying in the exact same spot, millennia ago, reciting a poem to the stars and hoping someone heard it. Below you, the household stirs gently. Someone hums a lullaby to a baby, off-key, but gently persistent. The clay walls hold the warmth of the day, and even in sleep, this home feels lived in. Loved in. You remember something an older woman told you earlier, that when her husband first came to claim her, she hadn't spoken a word for 3 days. She was terrified. But then he showed up with a goat, not for her father, but for her. It had a bell around its neck and was absolutely ridiculous. And she laughed. It was the first time in days. That's when I decided I might like him, she said. Sometimes love doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It trickles in with goat bells and awkward silences. You ask yourself how much of what you're seeing is true and how much you filled in. After all, these are old bones, old stones. And yet, love always leaves residue. A worn path between doorways. A groove in a shared bed. A name scratched into a bowl meant for two. You rise again and step toward the edge of the rooftop. In the distance, you see the ziggurat outlined against the stars, one tier, then another, stacked like a cosmic ladder. You wonder how many people climbed those stairs praying for a lover. Or for a child. Or just for the feeling of not being alone under this massive sky. You look down at the city. It hums with history and longing. Not the kind you find in museums. The kind that lives in gestures. In repetition. In two hands holding the same cup night after night. You wonder how many couples found each other in the spaces between rituals, in the breath between verses, in the grain of a clay tablet they both touched. And then you realize, love here isn't a single event. It's not the wedding. Not the poem. Not even the law. It's all of it. The repetition. The routine. The small acts of devotion piled like bricks into a ziggurat of memory, so when the elderly woman on the rooftop stands to stretch, and her husband offers his hand to steady her, not because she needs it, but because he always does, you feel the story settle into place. That gesture is 4,000 years old, and it still speaks. You wake to the sound of carts on limestone, of sandals slapping through sunlit courtyards, and of metal jewelry clinking with every turn of the wrist. This isn't the Clay-Ann Reed world of Mesopotamia anymore. You've drifted north, then west, following trade routes, silk whispers, and the rustle of embroidered veils. You're in ancient Anatolia now, near the bustling heart of the Hittite Empire. Stone walls tower above you, etched with lions and eagles and men with stiff beards holding staffs. The sun catches on copper shields. You smell charred cedar and sweet spiced wine. And underneath it all, tension. Not the hostile kind, but the kind that hums through a city where politics, weather, and marriages are all negotiated over breakfast. Here, love is strategic, but it can also be strangely soft. You follow a woman named Zuli as she carries a basket of lentils toward the citadel. She walks with the confidence of someone who has negotiated 5 marriages, 2 for herself, 3 for her daughters. She talks while walking, barely pausing for breath. The third one, she's smart. Wants love and land. The trick, she says, is never to look eager. The city is full of these calculations. You pass scribes recording contracts in old Hittite cuneiform, guards adjusting bronze belts, children chasing chickens, and a girl who lifts her veil just long enough to wink at a boy sharpening plow blades. The Hittites were masters of compromise. Their empire, spread across modern-day Turkey and beyond, was a patchwork of peoples and customs. So, like their treaties and battle plans, intimacy had to be flexible. Marriage here wasn't just an emotional affair, it was diplomacy. Tied to property, loyalty, even peace between rival clans, and yet, beneath the ink and ritual, desire still smoldered. You visit a temple archive, where thousands of clay tablets have been uncovered. Some are royal correspondence. Others are treaties. But a few, precious few, are personal. One is from a woman to her absent husband: I wait for you even though my mother says I should not. I wear the red scarf you left, though it smells of horses now. I touch it to my face when I sleep. You're struck again by that familiar tone, the ordinary heartbeat of missing someone. You enter a small home near the edge of the market. The walls are stone, the windows, small slits. Inside, a couple prepares dinner together. He peels onions, eyes watering. She kneads dough, laughing as he exaggerates his suffering. They were married 5 years ago, she says. Chosen by her uncle. She was not thrilled. He looked like a startled goat. The man, without missing a beat, says, still do. And she nods. Yes, but now I like the goat. And that's the heart of it in Anatolia. Affection grows sideways. It often starts in duty but sprouts into intimacy, not loudly, but deeply. Through routines. Through food. Through the slow undoing of suspicion. You ask about courtship, and Zuli cackles. Courtship? There's no courtship. There's timing. There's gossip. And if you're lucky, a man who knows how to build a roof that doesn't leak. Still, there are rituals. A boy might place a spindle on a girl's doorstep, an invitation to weave a future. Or he might sneak a fig into her apron during the spring festival. Subtle, but obvious to everyone, you visit a festival yourself. Bright colors. Dances that spiral in on themselves. Horns blaring, feet stomping, hands clasped in complicated circles. During the fertility rite, young couples are accidentally paired for games. The winners get garlands. The losers? They tend to disappear behind tents anyway. You catch sight of a young woman adjusting her necklace. She's anxious. She tells you she's about to meet a suitor chosen by her father. She hasn't seen him yet. I hope he's kind, she says. But mostly, I hope he doesn't smell like boiled cabbage. You ask what happens if she hates him, she shrugs. Then I'll learn to be clever. There's no illusion here that love is effortless. In fact, in many Hittite homes, affection is seen as a skill, something built. A well-kept household, a predictable routine, a dry bed in winter, these are foundations. But so is laughter. So is remembering that your partner hates goat stew and loves plum jam. You glance over a surviving law code. It outlines penalties for abuse, compensation for abandonment, and even guidelines for second wives. Not exactly romantic. But nestled in the clauses is this: if a man takes a wife and she becomes ill, he shall not cast her aside but care for her as he would a sister. It's a jarring contrast to your assumptions. This isn't modern tenderness. It's legal affection. But it's affection nonetheless. You're invited to a wedding that evening. It's noisy, sweaty, full of stomping and spiced wine. The bride wears coins braided into her hair. The groom looks like he hasn't slept in a week. There are toasts, boasts, and one uncle who insists on singing badly but with vigor. After the feast, the couple disappears. You hear giggles. Then a door closing. Then silence. You stay behind, helping clear dishes. Zuli tells you her first marriage was a disaster. The man drank. Threw things. Called her names. Her brothers intervened. She remarried. The second one is still annoying, she says, but he listens. That's worth more than coin. On the way home, you pass a public square where a scribe recites an old story. The storm god Tarhunt falls in love with a mountain goddess. He brings her figs and gold. She ignores him. He brings her thunder. She listens. He brings her patience. She stays. The tale ends with laughter and cheers. You wonder if it's true, but truth, in this place, wears many faces. A signed contract. A half-eaten figure, a red scarf that smells like horses, and all of it, somehow, is love, and all of it, somehow, is love. You pause at a narrow stairway that winds up toward the city wall, stones worn smooth from 1,000 feet. And 1,000 quiet rendezvous. It's darker here, quieter too. You spot two figures sitting on the steps, silhouettes wrapped in a shared cloak. They don't speak. They just lean in, heads nearly touching. Whatever agreement they've made, it doesn't need explaining. Some affection doesn't announce itself. It waits until no one's looking. The woman glances toward you briefly. Not with fear, not with shame, just calm acknowledgement. The moment belongs to her. To them. And you, the observer, are lucky just to witness it. You continue climbing, until the rooftops of the city stretch before you like a map. Smoke curls from chimneys. Lanterns flicker. And somewhere, just faintly, you hear a flute. Its notes are wandering, hopeful, slightly off-key. You smile. Someone down there is trying. Always trying. Above the rooftops, a shrine sits quietly, half carved into the stone. You duck inside. There's no priest, no crowd. Just a small altar, worn from years of touch, and a clay votive figure of a goddess with wide hips and a face smoothed faceless by generations of fingers. Someone has left 2 offerings, a single ripe plum and a loop of woven grass. No words, no tablet, no scroll. Just symbols of sweetness and simplicity. You sit for a while, and the weight of it all settles into your shoulders, the marriages arranged like crops, the longing stifled in legal clauses, the tenderness folded into routine. In a world where every resource must be accounted for, affection is not wasted. It's measured. And then, against all odds, it blooms. A woman enters the shrine quietly behind you. She doesn't look at you. She places a palm on the altar, closes her eyes, and whispers, "Let him sleep through the night. Let him not ache anymore." You don't ask who. You don't need to. That, too, is a kind of love. You leave the shrine and make your way back through the dim alleys, past courtyards flickering with oil lamps. You pass a baker kneading dough by starlight. A man brushing ash from his wife. Sleeve. A mother tucking her child's sandal beneath her mat. None of it makes the epic tablets. None of it is declared in bronze, but these are the forms love takes in Anatolia. Not grand confessions, but steadiness. Presence. Survival made gentle. As you return to the home that's hosting you, stone-walled, fig-scented, you hear one final thing: laughter. A woman and man, whispering behind a curtain, dissolving into giggles like teenagers. They hush themselves, fail, and laugh again, and that sound, muffled and human and free, feels older than writing. It's the laughter of people who have decided, after everything, that joy is still worth the risk, because in this world, love is not what you say. It's what you do. When no one writes it down, it starts with a fruit plate, not a battle. Not a sermon. Not a vision from heaven, just a plate of dates, neatly arranged and glossed with honey, presented at a council breakfast by a servant too well-groomed and far too silent. You're present only because your latest role, unofficial but vital, is scribed to the uneasy. That is, you're good at keeping minutes during meetings where no one trusts each other and everyone's knife is just a bit too sharp. The year is vague, the empire shifting, but the room is unmistakable. Welcome to ancient Persia, during the long stretch of Achaemenid glory. Here, power wears perfume and betrayal wears pearls. The carpet beneath your sandals is embroidered with dragons, and the men sitting around you quote Zoroaster when convenient, and their mistresses when they think no one's listening. You're in Persepolis, or maybe Susa. It's hard to tell when all the walls look like sculptures and everyone's pretending they weren't crying last night. On the outside, the empire runs like a miracle. Couriers gallop on the royal road. Tribute flow from as far as Egypt and Bactria. Gold fills the coffers. And the King of Kings, Shahanshah, has so many wives, concubines, and daughters-in-law that no one quite knows who belongs to whom, but inside these walls, love is a chessboard. And you're watching the pieces move. You notice the queen's sister-in-law adjusting her bracelet just as the satrap from Lydia finishes his toast. He doesn't look her way, but he should have. Because she's been quietly moving servants between palaces for months. And her son's new tutor used to belong to the priesthood. Which means someone's positioning themselves for something. Affection, in this palace, is never just affection, it's leverage. Or protection. Or both. You recall a scroll tucked away in the royal archives, a letter from a princess to her cousin. Written in cuneiform so formal it squeaks: "Do not trust the one who brings gifts after dark. He loves your mother more than your father." You wonder how many hearts broke while trying to protect their families. Still, beyond the velvet curtains and strategic marriages, the real romances happen in the kitchens. The stable yards. The perfumer's wing. You find a young woman polishing silver. She blushes when asked about her husband. "He brought me quince paste on our wedding night," she says. "I knew then he wasn't terrible. High praise here, and then there are the eunuchs, ever present, ever silent, keepers of both secrets and doors. Some serve out of loyalty, some by force. But many have stories too, of affections unspoken, of companionship forged in corners the kings will never see. One of them lets you read a note tucked behind a tapestry. Your hand on my shoulder was the only warmth I felt this year. It's unsigned. It's also unsent, but it was written. And that's something. You wander past the royal gardens, immaculate, symmetrical, with water running in channels so precise it's hard to believe they're centuries old. Two gardeners pause to drink from a shared cup. One tells the other he smells like basil. They laugh. It's the smallest thing, and maybe the realest. You're invited, reluctantly, into a private salon, where noblewomen sip wine behind latticework. One of them leans in and tells you her husband doesn't speak to her unless others are watching. Another says she shares her bed with a bodyguard, but only when the moon is new. A third pulls out a carved ivory mirror. I talk to myself in it, she admits. Because someone should. Affection in the Achaemenid court is equal parts survival and subtext. You read another line from a scroll, this one attributed to a court poet. I fell in love with the way she poured tea, slow, precise, uncaring if I burned. No one knows who the she is. Likely no one ever did. But the line survives, as lines tend to do. At a wedding later that week, a minor noble to a military commander's daughter, you notice the guests measuring each other more than the couple. The bride is veiled in silk. The groom beams with the kind of pride that says, this was a good alliance. You see the bride slip a folded note to her cousin before walking forward. It's swift, practiced. Inside, later, it reads, tell him I'll remember the pomegranate tree, always. She won't see the tree again. But the memory, soft, defiant, and absolutely unnecessary, will be hers forever, and that's what love is here, a thing kept. A thing hidden. A thing remembered more than lived. You sit one evening beside an archivist who drinks too much date wine. He tells you about King Darius, who supposedly had a favorite wife. Not the most beautiful. Not the most politically useful. But the one who made him laugh when his sandals squeaked. That's love, the archivist says, when you can laugh in sandals like that. And maybe it is, maybe love isn't just in the tapestries and palaces, but in the quiet embarrassment of everyday closeness. At night, in the servants' quarters, two women lie back to back on a single mat. One says, I'm afraid he'll leave. The other replies, if he does, I'll kick him. Nothing is solved. But everything feels slightly safer. You think of all the words left unsaid in this empire of scripted speech. All the glances too fast to record. All the gestures, adjusting a robe, slicing a fig, pausing before speaking, that meant everything, but nothing official. You think of the queen's sigh when she watches her daughter dance. You think of the scar behind the head cook's ear, given by a boy he hasn't seen in 20 years. You think of the gold-threaded pillow embroidered with two peacocks facing each other. It was stitched by someone who knew exactly how close two creatures can be, without ever touching, and you realize this, in a place so concerned with legacy and lineage. Affection becomes the rebellion, it lives in jokes. In shared wine. In the act of remembering someone when you don't have to. Love in ancient Persia? It's not always in the records, but it's always in the room, even when unspoken. It hovers, just behind the silk curtains, beneath the clink of goblets, in the long pause before someone says what they're supposed to, instead of what they mean. You watch the courtiers file out of an evening banquet, their faces trained into unreadable masks. But behind them, you notice a cook slipping a fig tart into a napkin and handing it to a page. The boy grins too widely, thanks too quickly. You've seen that kind of exchange before. It's not about the pastry. It never is. Later that night, you find yourself wandering the outer garden walkways. Lanterns glow in shallow bowls. A cat watches you from a windowsill, bored. And a voice, low and cracked with age, calls softly from the shadows. It's an old woman, sitting by a jasmine bush. I used to live in the harem, she says, not proudly, not bitterly, just factually. I stitched pillows and listened. That was my job. Listening. You ask her what she remembers most, she doesn't hesitate, the sound of girls crying into combs. You sit beside her, quiet. Then she adds, but also the way they sang when they thought no one could hear. The little songs. Just for themselves. And that's what lingers about Persia, not the pageantry, not the processions, but the ways people stole moments of softness from a system designed to harden them. The guard offers a flower to a dancer. A priest secretly writes poetry in the margins of religious texts. A wife, knowing her husband will never love her, still tucks a sprig of mint in his travel pouch, because she hopes he won't get sick. These aren't grand gestures. They're not sung about by bards. But they happen again and again, in lives too short and censored to wait for perfect conditions, in ancient Persia. Love is not lightning. It is drip water. Patient. Persistent. Quietly reshaping stone, you look up at the stars, pinpricks above the black hills. Someone's up there, the Zoroastrians believe. Watching. Weighing souls. Tracking the balance between good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. You hope love counts as all three. You wake before dawn this time, to the clang of bells and the distant lowing of oxen. The air is crisp, almost cold, and there's a scent of crushed juniper and freshly burnt dung in the breeze. You're not in Persia anymore. You're farther east now, deep into the Indian subcontinent. And not the glittering Mughal courts or colonial railroads you might expect. No, you've landed in the long, slow heartbeat of ancient India, somewhere between the Vedic chants and the flowering of the Mauryan Empire. The streets are narrow, the temples high, and the sacred river winds through everything like a string of unspoken desires. It's early, and a woman in a saffron sari walks to the river's edge. She doesn't speak. She pours a thin stream of water from a copper vessel, murmuring a prayer that feels older than the stones beneath her feet. You follow her gaze and see the first hint of pink on the river's surface. In this culture, love is ritual. Not just an emotion, it's an offering. You sit in a courtyard soon after, where a teacher is reciting verses from the Rigveda to a half-asleep group of students. His voice is slow and melodic. You catch the words, Prajanam Patti, and later you ask what it means. The Lord of Creation, someone tells you. But also, just. The one who gives life. The partner. You blink. Even in a verse about cosmic order, there's space for partnership. Even in hymns to fire and sky, there are lines that ache like poetry, and if you think that means this world was all mysticism and gentle smiles, you'd be wrong, because the Kama Sutra is coming, but not yet. First, you need to understand that love here is philosophical. Intimacy is not separate from the self, it's part of your soul's journey. The Upanishads speak of the Atman, the self that seeks unity. The path to liberation, moksha, might run through meditation, but just as often, it runs through longing. You sit in a village square and listen as two elderly women talk while grinding millet. One says she met her husband during a monsoon festival. The other chuckles and says, so he was already soaked when you saw him? They both laugh until they cough. The first woman adds, he brought me ginger afterward. Said he didn't want me catching cold. That, you learn, was basically a proposal. Desire, in ancient Indian texts, is one of the four aims of life, kama, alongside dharma, duty, artha, prosperity, and moksha, liberation. It's not a mistake. It's not shameful. It's expected. Cultivated. You walk through a hall of sculptures, stone figures carved into temples, locked in dance, in embrace, in gestures so fluid they almost move. They are gods and mortals, queens and cowherds, lovers caught mid-laugh. Some are explicitly sensual. Some are tender. Some are both. A local priest shrugs when he sees your raised eyebrows. The divine lives in everything, he says, even the curve of a waist. You remember that phrase. It follows you through streets where love stories aren't just tales, they're scriptures. You hear one such tale performed that evening in song. A woman with a voice like warm honey sings of Radha and Krishna. Radha, the milkmaid, Krishna, the flute-playing god. Their love is flirtation, pain, union, separation, and yearning all braided together, but what's striking is this: they are not married. Their story isn't about legal union. It's about emotional combustion. You feel your chest tighten when the singer reaches the part where Radha waits beneath a tree, and Krishna doesn't come, but he does. Eventually. And when they meet again, the universe holds its breath. That's love here. Messy. Mythic. Devastating. Sacred. You're invited to a wedding next, a real one this time, not celestial. The bride walks 7 times around a fire with her groom. Each round is a vow, for nourishment, for strength, for joy, for children, for health, for harmony, for friendship. The 7th is the most intimate. With this step, we become friends. You remember that one too, later. You speak with a poet under a neem tree. He's scribbling verses in Sanskrit on palm leaves. He tells you he's writing about a woman who fell in love with a man she saw only once, from across a crowded festival. She never saw him again. But she still dreams about him. Is that a tragedy? You ask. He shakes his head. It's a devotion. There are types of love here: Shringara Rasa, romantic, bhakti, devotional, matri, friendly, karuna, compassionate. Whole texts categorize emotions, like a cookbook of the soul, and then, finally, you reach a small library where someone hands you a copy of the Kama Sutra. You handle it like it's about to explode, because you've heard the myths, that it's all acrobatics and innuendo. But as you read, something different emerges. It's not just a book of positions, it's a treatise on connection. It discusses compatibility, conversation, art, how to argue kindly, how to seduce slowly, how to touch with purpose, how to listen while stilling your own breath. Yes, there are descriptions of pleasure. But also how to maintain love when passion fades. How to rekindle it. How to know when it cannot be saved, and woven through it all is a sense of equality, radical for its time. That women should feel desire. That they should speak it. That they should be pursued, not possessed. You meet a dancer who tells you her favorite line is this: when two souls smile at one another across silence. That is the beginning of union. It's in chapter 2. She's memorized it. The night deepens. You walk to the river again. Someone is floating small candles on leaves. One for each wish. One for each name not spoken aloud. You let one go, just to see what happens, and you realize that in ancient India, love was not separate from the sacred. It was the sacred. Not just in temples, but in kitchens. Not just in poetry, but in silence. Not just in touch, but in longing. You lie down on a carved stone bench, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and sandalwood. And you think, this isn't a culture that feared desire, it studied it. Honored it. Gave it a place at the table, and in doing so, it gave you one too, and in doing so, it gave you one too. Even as you lie there, barely a visitor, barely awake, you feel it humming around you. The slow reverence with which people speak names. The pause before a glance. The way even a pot of boiling lentils is stirred with care that could almost be mistaken for love. Nearby, a man sketches something into the dirt with a stick. You lean closer. It's not a picture. It's a verse, his own, apparently. He says he's composing it for his wife, who's away visiting her mother. He doesn't write her name. He writes, "The shade is wrong without you." That's all. No flourish. Just that, and you think, maybe that's what endures, not the fire rituals, though they're beautiful. Not the poems carved into temple walls, though they're intricate. What lingers are the moments that never needed an audience. You stroll past a weaver's hut where a young woman knots threads into a wedding sash. Her fingers move rhythmically, but her eyes dart toward the path every few seconds. You ask if she's expecting someone. She nods. He walks by every day, she says. He hasn't spoken yet. But yesterday, he slowed. You smile. She grins. Across town, a group of musicians begins a twilight raga, an instrumental piece meant not for dancing, but for listening. The notes dip and sway. Each one seems to ask a question and then answer it tenderly. A boy and girl sit just close enough for their hands to touch, but don't. They close their eyes at the same time, though. It's all so quiet, not because love here is hidden, but because it is everywhere, and when something is everywhere, it doesn't need to shout. The grandmother offering mango slices to her grandchildren, cut into the shapes their mother once liked. The priest adjusting the flower garland on a statue of Parvati, goddess of marriage, with the same care he once used on his wife's hair. The girl who keeps adding turmeric to the rice even though everyone else says it's enough, because he always liked it a little brighter. These things don't make it into scrolls, but they're real. You pass a crumbling wall, painted long ago with faded red script. A line from the Bhagavad Gita, someone tells you. In this life, even a little of true devotion saves one from great fear. And that's the final lesson, isn't it? Love here, whether it's devotional, romantic, or entirely unspoken, saves people. From fear. From loneliness. From becoming less than fully human, even if it hurts, even if it isn't returned, even if it lives only in the space between glances. You watch one final candle bob along the river's surface, its light steady despite the current, and for a long, long time, you watch it drift. The sound that wakes you this time isn't birdsong or temple bells. It's a fountain, stone-lipped and marble-lined, whispering in the dark like a secret that's been waiting all night to be told. You're in Baghdad, at the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the city hums even before sunrise. The Tigris slinks nearby like a silver ribbon under the moonlight, and the domes above you, green-tiled, gold-leafed, pearl-dotted, gleam faintly in the indigo glow. You're not here as a courtier, or a warrior, or even a merchant. You're here as a shadow, tucked along the corridor edges of the House of Wisdom, following the scent of saffron ink, rosewater, and the long smoke trails of debate. And this time, love doesn't shout or flirt, it whispers, through verses scribbled in margins, behind veils made sheer with longing, under jasmine trees that remember every word said beneath their branches. You find yourself watching a young man, barefoot, clearly a scholar's assistant, slip a note into the spine of a book on logic. A girl retrieves it moments later. She doesn't open it there. She waits. Later, under a fig tree, she lets her fingertips pause on the folded paper. As if it's warm, even in the most intellectual corridors of the Abbasid Golden Age. Love is clever, patient, and impossibly poetic, because poetry isn't just decoration here, it's oxygen. You attend a gathering that evening in a courtyard thick with lilies and clove. A woman recites from memory, not from paper. Her voice is low but assured, and the verse she chooses is old, perhaps Al-Kansa, perhaps Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, perhaps herself. I desire you with two desires, one for love, and one because you are worthy. Someone nearby murmurs, she's not talking about a man. But someone else says, she is. And also, she isn't. In Abbasid Baghdad, love is not just personal. It's theological, intellectual, metaphysical. It stretches itself across layers. Desire isn't forbidden, but it must be transfigured, sometimes upward into piety, sometimes outward into verse, sometimes sideways into metaphors so slippery you can only grasp them by feel. You learn quickly that the veil doesn't conceal so much as it invites interpretation. A lowered gaze, a hem adjusted, a cup poured slowly, these are languages, just as potent as Arabic calligraphy, in the palace gardens, designed like earthly visions of paradise. You overhear two women laughing beneath a trellis of blooming citrus. One says, "He told me my laughter was like cinnamon." The other snorts. "What a terrible spice. I hope you married him." "I did," she says. "Because I knew he couldn't lie." These are the stories you're here for, but you also learn to read the absences. There's a servant girl who sings while sweeping, always the same melody. You hum it once, and a cook tells you, that's the song of a woman whose lover was taken to Basra. She sings it to remember how his voice cracked when he said goodbye. No one knows her name. But the tune endures. You sit in on a reading of 1001 Nights, though the name changes, sometimes it's just the night stories, or the endless tales. The speaker, an elderly eunuch with gold-threaded robes, pauses often for effect. He described Scheherazade not just as clever, but as brave. Not just as beautiful, but as someone who knew how to stall death with story, and you realize, the whole performance is a kind of seduction. A strategic delay. A plea to the human heart, don't kill me yet. I still have more beauty to give. That, too, is a kind of love, a love of life. Of language. Of staying close to someone, even when the axe is sharpened and the guards are listening. You ask a physician, wrinkled and sharp-eyed, if love ever enters his work. Of course, he says. People only get sick from two things, imbalance of the humors and longing. You ask which is harder to cure, he doesn't answer. He just hands you a rose and walks off. The Abbasid elite were great lovers of courtship. But rarely in the Western sense. Courtship here is a battle of wit, a contest of memory, a game of poetic references. A young man might compare his beloved's lips to wine, her walk to gazelles, her glance to the blade of a scimitar, and still not win her favor, because she wants to hear her in the metaphor, not just the cliché. You speak with a widowed spice seller who says her first husband never once complimented her appearance, but he always bought 3 figs instead of 2, in case I wanted one more. She remarried. She says. The second husband had 10 poems memorized but didn't know how to listen, the figs were better. You find yourself scribbling that down. You walk past a window where a couple argues quietly, about soap. Not infidelity. Not inheritance. Just whose turn it was to refill the dish. She throws a towel. He ducks. And then they both laugh, and you think, this is what love looks like when it survives, not just passion, but persistence. The long, slow work of staying close while life rearranges everything else. You visit a school where boys recite couplets from Almaden Abbey, and one line stuns you silent, I am the one whose love taught hearts how to break. A teacher says that line once caused a girl to faint. No one knows if it was love or heatstroke. But the legend remains, and you come to understand that here, the most dangerous thing isn't desire, it's indifference. Desire can be channeled. Subtly. Symbolically. Strategically, but to be unnoticed, that's a death no verse can delay. At night, in a low-roofed home not far from the palace, an old couple prepares for sleep. He oils her hair. She adjusts the lamp wick. They say nothing, but when she lies down, she reaches for his hand and tucks it under her pillow, and he lets it stay there. You think of all the gardens and scrolls and cushions and verses, and suddenly, this is the moment that stays with you most, not because it's grand, but because it doesn't need an audience. This is Abbasid love, coded, cloaked, perfumed, but real, enduring, and always whispering, if you're quiet enough to hear, and always whispering, if you're quiet enough to hear. Even in the silence between sentences, there's a kind of music to it. A pulse that runs beneath the tiles, the textiles, the tension of unspoken words. You return to the house of wisdom the next morning, stepping over cats napping beside potted myrtles, past astronomers who've been awake all night arguing about Saturn's rings. A young scribe named Yusuf offers you tea and points out a margin doodle beside a copied poem, two birds on a fig branch. One offering the other a berry. He says it was accidental, Yusuf says. But I know who he drew it for. You do too, eventually. She arrives with a basket of ink vials, sets one beside the manuscript without speaking, and doesn't even look at him. But her wrist brushes his, just slightly, as she turns. He exhales, slow, even. But you catch the tremble. Elsewhere in the city, a jeweler displays rings said to be carved with verses so small they can only be read under magnification. One is from a prince to his secret love. Written on the inside of a band no wider than a chickpea. It says, "Your silence taught me more than your reply ever could." It was never delivered. The prince died in a skirmish on the road to Samara. The ring sits behind glass now, but people still line up to whisper near it. Just in case it remembers, you pass a calligraphy shop where brushes hang like wind chimes, and a woman sells ink made from pomegranate skin. She tells you her grandmother used to write love letters, not to a man, but to God. When her husband died, she says, she kept writing anyway. You ask why, she shrugs. Some people just need someone to tell their heart to. You think of Scheherazade again. And realize maybe all of Baghdad is still telling stories, about love. Against silence, to delay the end, there's an old proverb a merchant quotes as you pass his stall, even the most guarded door listens for the one who knocks softly. In the Abbasid world, softness isn't weakness, it's a strategy. A virtue. A form of poetry, sharpened to survive, and sometimes, it's simply this, someone reaching across a carpet, past politics and poems and propriety, to brush a finger across yours, just once, and then going back to sipping tea. You wake to church bells, slow, heavy things, too loud for morning but too familiar to ignore. You're in Europe now. Not the soft tapestries and almond milk baths of Andalusian gardens. Not the whispered Abbasid metaphors tucked in folded scrolls. This is the stony heartbeat of medieval Christendom, and it pulses with penitence. It's the 12th century, maybe the 13th, hard to say, when the sky always seems to be gray and the records disagree by decades. But you can tell what's coming by the armor. And the guilt, you've landed among the Crusaders. Or what's left of them, sunburnt men returning from Jerusalem, limping from wounds no priest can fully absolve. The city was taken. Then lost. Then taken again. And back home, they now sit in confession for sins committed under banners painted with crosses. You're in a small French town, surrounded by wet stone and sermons, and already, love feels unwelcome here, or at least mistrusted, not because it doesn't exist, but because it competes with salvation. A young woman fetches water near the abbey gate. She looks over her shoulder twice before speaking to a stable boy. Their exchange is brief, eyes darting more than mouths. You hear her whisper, "My uncle saw us." That's all. But it's enough to end a life, or at least a future. You see, in this world, chastity isn't just a virtue, it's policy. Desire is dangerous. Dangerous to the soul, to the social order, to the fragile hierarchy that keeps priests in robes and peasants in mud. You find yourself in a monastery, where even the candles seem to flicker in fear. The monks chant in Latin, heads bowed, robes stiff. But later, one of them breaks off, lingers by a window, and sighs. Not from piety. From longing. You ask him, gently, what he misses. He says, the sound of someone laughing at my jokes. That's all. Not touch. Not sin. Just that someone once found him amusing. You see, the church taught that earthly love distracts from divine love. Marriage was grudgingly allowed for the laity, but romantic attachment, even between spouses, was something to restrain, not indulge, and so, it leaked out sideways, into courtly love poetry, where knights adored ladies they could never touch, into songs sung by troubadours under balconies, lyrics laced with yearning so stylized they could be mistaken for prayers, into prayers, Where saints became the objects of a passion too raw for any earthly body to hold, you sit in a manner where the lady of the house embroiders in silence. Her husband, much older, speaks only to his steward. But every night, she leaves an extra candle lit in the corridor. And every morning, it's gone, along with the young tutor's muddy footprints. It's not an affair. Not officially. But it's something, and in this culture, even the suggestion of desire becomes theater. Entire rules of etiquette emerge, fencing emotion behind ritual. A man might not dare touch a woman's hand, but he'll compose a poem about it, detailing every imagined brush of knuckle to palm as if it were sacrament. You meet a woman in a convent. Her hair is shaved under her veil, her hands stained from manuscript ink. She writes letters on behalf of others, brothers to sisters, merchants to wives, noblemen to secret loves. You ask if she ever writes for herself, she hesitates. Then opens a drawer, inside, a parchment covered in tiny script. A prayer. Addressed not to God, but to someone unnamed. I imagine him kneeling beside me at Mass, it says. Never speaking. Just there. It's unsigned. Of course it is, because in medieval Europe, the interior life was both refuge and prison. You listen to a bishop thunder from the pulpit about sins of the flesh. Behind him, a boy fidgets beside a girl barely out of childhood. Their hands almost touch on the pew, but don't. When the sermon ends, she leaves quickly. He stays, eyes on the stone floor, and you realize, shame doesn't need to be taught here. It's ambient. Still, it's not all suppression. You attend a village wedding, muddy and chaotic. The bride laughs too loud. The groom drops the bread. Children run through the church before the vows finish. And somehow, it all feels more true than the icy hymns of the nobility. Love survives, but in its lowest, muddiest forms. In whispered promises. In calloused hands wrapped around someone else's fingers. In tolerance, more than passion, you visit a scholar's home. He has a wife who translates Latin and a daughter who carves bone dice. You ask him how he met his wife. He grins. She corrected my Latin declension, he says. It was humiliating. I fell in love. She rolls her eyes. He still gets it wrong. They sleep in separate beds, of course. But the door between their rooms is always left open. You visit a scriptorium where a monk illuminates the margins of a psalter with dandelions, rabbits, and, once, a tiny drawing of two lovers embracing behind a tree. It's half erased now, likely by a stricter brother, but the shape remains, and so does the message. Someone, once, remembered what softness looked like, and even here, amid fire and brimstone sermons, arranged marriages, and constant fear of damnation, there are moments of beauty, a nun pressing violets between pages, a farmer carving a heart into a spoon for his wife. A dying soldier clutching a ribbon someone once tied in his hair. Years ago, you read a line scrawled in a chapel's hidden crevice, just under the altar, God may forgive me, but I wish I'd kissed her. And you wonder if he ever did. In medieval Europe, love is a ledger, a gamble, and a sin, but it also manages to be something else, a rebellion against despair, a reason to stay. A candle left burning. A name whispered not in confession, but in hope, and that hope, fragile, heretical, utterly human, still echoes through every cold, stone corridor, still echoes through every cold, stone corridor, because even in this world of rigid penitence and endless judgment, the heart cannot help itself. You find yourself standing before a reliquary, encased in crystal and silver. Inside, a saint's finger bone. The priest explains how it was brought back from the Holy Land, wrapped in linen and reverently kissed by pilgrims. But he doesn't tell you what you notice beneath the glass, a scrap of parchment, folded carefully, tucked behind the relic. You tilt your head, the script is faded but legible, may she be remembered even if I am not. A prayer. Or maybe just a wish, you ask if anyone knows who wrote it. The priest shrugs. There are many names lost to time. You think, that's the point, isn't it? Love in this era wasn't just hidden, it was often anonymous. Not for shame, but survival. And still, people risked the writing of it. Because to write something down, even if it's burned later, is to prove it existed. You pass a field where peasants thresh barley, singing songs too rhythmic to be church-sanctioned. You ask one old woman about the lyrics. She laughs. That one's about a boy who pretended to be deaf just to get out of confession. You ask why, she says, so he could spend more time near the miller's daughter. A foolish song. A ridiculous story. But you remember it long after the bells start again, even the clergy couldn't escape it. You flip through a monk's diary, brittle with age, ink faded at the edges. Amid the meditations on humility and sleep deprivation, there's a single entry. Today I saw a falcon fly with a ribbon in its beak. I thought of her again. It doesn't say who, but he wrote it anyway, and maybe that's what medieval love really was, not a grand gesture, not a proud parade of vows, but a series of tiny defiances. A glance held too long. A sleeve brushed intentionally. A ribbon remembered, the small things that made the gloom briefly feel like dawn, and somehow, against every pressure to deny it, it still bloomed, in hedgerows. In drafty kitchens. In the margins of prayer books. In the lullabies sung by women who had stopped believing in romance, but still believed in warmth, because no matter how many sermons were thundered or rules were written, one truth remained unshakable: the soul remembers softness. Even in the hardest of centuries, you blink, and when your eyes open, you're still in medieval Europe, but something's changed. The buildings are taller. The windows are glassier. There are perfumes in the air now, lavender, rose, civet, and more layers on every body that passes. The cloth is finer, and so is the lace that hems it. Where once there was rough wool and homespun linen, now you see silks, velvets, brocades. Sleeves widen. Bodices tighten. You've landed in late medieval Europe, somewhere between the 14th and 15th centuries. The plague has come and gone, though really, it's never gone. The cities have grown, and love, if it's not nobler, it's certainly more elaborately dressed, and corseted. Yes, corsets are here, though not quite the steel cage ones you're imagining from later centuries. These are early versions, more like stiffened bodices, meant to sculpt the figure beneath a gown that could take 20 minutes just to fasten. And underneath it all, a subtle game of glances, poems, gestures, and repressed confessions, because while the clothes have changed, the rules haven't relaxed. If anything, they've tightened. You overhear a priest in a town square delivering a sermon about vanity. He's shouting about sin, as they do, but today the target isn't lust, it's fashion. Corsets are devil's string. He proclaims. A rib-bound trap to lure men to ruin. The women nearby all listen silently. One adjusts her laces tighter while he's still speaking. In this century, love comes bound in double meanings. The church continues to dominate public morality, but behind closed doors, people are experimenting, through poetry, through art, through garments that suggest without declaring. You walk down a narrow street in Bruges, past chalked symbols on walls marking which houses are quarantined and which are safe. In one upper window, a woman leans out, brushing her hair while humming a song that sounds suspiciously secular. A man in a red cap walks by and tips his hat, but he doesn't look up. That would be too obvious. You're invited to a merchant's house, and the daughter there, Eleanor, is preparing for a suitor's visit. She insists it's only to discuss a trade alliance, but the way she pinches her cheeks and reties her sleeve suggests otherwise. Her mother helps. Not with speeches, but with practice lines. What if he says my father's ships are too small? Then say, only until they're joined with his, and if he brings up my dowry? Her mother shrugs. Then smile. And cough. And ask if he prefers red wine or white. Eleanor grins. So. Seduction through misdirection. Exactly. It's not courtly love anymore, not entirely. That world of nobles pining through stained glass and sonnets is still lingering, but now money matters more than metaphor. Still, in private, people are dreaming. You sit with a seamstress who reads Boccaccio's Decameron at night, not aloud, of course. She whispers the good parts under her breath, shaking her head with scandalized delight. Too bold, she mutters. Too modern. Then reads the same passage again. You stroll through a cathedral, where every surface glimmers with painted saints and chiseled martyrs. But in the shadows, on a side wall, a sculpture hides, two lovers carved into a single slab of limestone. The woman rests her head against the man's chest. He holds a scroll in one hand. The other is lost, worn smooth by centuries of fingers brushing it secretly. Legend says they died in the same week, someone tells you. But not together. The family forbade it. So the mason carved this after they were gone. Quietly. You sit in a market square where actors perform moral plays. Warning of seduction and the dangers of lewdness. The script demands that desire be punished, usually by being dragged off stage by a figure dressed as Hellmouth. But the crowd boos when desire exits. They wanted her to win, because by now, the gap between what's preached and what's practiced is enormous. The paintings show saints. But the songs in taverns are about unlaced bodices, stolen kisses in the grape fields, and traveling monks with wandering vows. Even the nobles aren't immune. You visit a duchess's garden. She claims she's devoted to spiritual clarity, but the fountain at its center is shaped like Cupid, nude, winged, and laughing. She gives you a tour and mentions that her favorite flower is the white rose. Because it can hide a red one in its center. Subtlety is the currency of affection now. You hear about a scandal in Florence, two poets caught exchanging letters filled with metaphors too lush to be innocent. Their defense? We were only talking about weather patterns. No one believes them. Everyone memorizes the verses anyway, even clothing becomes a form of language. A ribbon tied just so could mean availability. A loose lock of hair might hint at openness. A pair of gloves given and then returned, that's practically a marriage proposal. You meet a boy who's just been jilted. He carves the first letter of his beloved's name into a loaf of bread, bakes it, and then eats it alone. You ask why, he shrugs. Better inside me than with someone else. The baker thinks it's romantic. The priest calls it gluttony. Neither is wrong. In one town, a woman is arrested for wearing her veil too thin. In another, a priest is quietly sent away for writing poems to a baker's son. In yet another, a widow takes in a female companion, for company, and they build a shared garden that blooms for 20 years. None of these stories are written down officially. But the manuscripts in convents tell everything. Even the nun who copies saints' lives includes in the margin tiny sketches, two hands clasped under a table, a bird delivering a letter to a girl in a tower, a man offering a pear to someone who's already bitten hers, and while sermons roar louder than ever, so do the silences in between. You walk past a chapel where a bride kneels alone, her groom late. When he does arrive, muddy, panting, penitent, she doesn't cry or scold. She simply reaches out, straightens his collar, and smiles. I knew you'd come, she says. Eventually. That's what love is now, not a flaming chariot. Not divine punishment. Just waiting in the cold until someone arrives, and then forgiving how long they took, because even in this stifling world of rules and laces and church warnings, love finds new doorways. Through laughter. Through poetry. Through dresses that are laced one way for virtue, and another way for rebellion, and always, always, through hands that find each other under too many layers of silk, through hands that find each other under too many layers of silk, and sometimes, it's not hands at all. Its letters hidden inside books, a pressed sprig of thyme slipped between pages of St. Augustine. A lace handkerchief folded and returned with the edges sewn slightly tighter, just enough for the recipient to know it wasn't hers anymore, but yours. You pass a university courtyard where students debate Thomas Aquinas by day and compose anonymous love poems by night. One boy pins a verse to a column, signed only a soul beneath your window. The next day, a reply appears beside it, then sings softer. I almost heard you dreaming. They never meet, but the entire dormitory starts placing bets on when they will. Nearby, a widow makes wax seals for merchants, red for debt notices, green for family letters, blue for love. The blue wax is always the first to run out. You ask her why. She says, no one wants to say it out loud. But everyone wants to be heard. At a convent's guest house, you overhear two novice nuns sharing stories by candlelight. One says, I used to dream of him, before I entered the order. The other doesn't answer for a long time, then whispers, I still do. The candle guttered while they spoke. Neither relit it. In a wine shop at the edge of a city wall, a middle-aged man plays a lute. He never sings the words, only hums them. When you ask why, he says, they were written for someone whose name I promised never to say again. And in that moment, you realize what this late medieval world has become, not a place where love is banished, but one where every expression of it is encrypted, coded, adorned, disguised in lace and velvet and double meaning. But still real. Still achingly present, even the gargoyles on cathedral towers seem to smirk knowingly. Because they've seen it all, you wake in Venice, and the world smells of brine, beeswax, and scandal. It's early dawn, but already gondolas are gliding silently through the canals like secrets passed between lovers. Laundry flaps between windows above, veils of cotton and linen, half modesty, half broadcast. The sun reflects off the greenish water like melted gold, and somewhere a bell tolls, not for mass, but for a meeting. You're in the 15th century, and love has started wearing masks, literally. Welcome to the Renaissance, not just the rebirth of classical ideals, but the slow, sumptuous unbuttoning of desire. People here have begun to rediscover the body, not as a shameful vessel to be disciplined, but as a thing of beauty, of geometry, of God-given symmetry. Plato still whispers from dusty books, but now so does Petrarch, and Boccaccio, and that Florentine painter who insists that a curved hip is as divine as a cathedral dome. And so, you walk the marbled halls of noble estates where the ceiling is painted with nymphs and the floor is polished with enough oil to catch a reflection of your own flushed cheeks. And yet, despite all this lushness, love still dances just out of reach. You attend a masquerade. Not the fantasy kind with fairy wings and glitter, but a Renaissance masquerada, where everyone is masked, but no one is pretending to be someone else. The mask is not a disguise. It's a permission slip. You watch a woman in deep blue velvet touch the shoulder of a man in a jester's mask. Neither says a word. But the way they move, like echoes trying to catch each other, you know they've met before. You know this isn't new. In fact, it may have been going on for years, because in this world, affairs are choreographed, not confessed. A nobleman might arrange for a lute teacher to visit his wife twice a week. A merchant's daughter may spend unusually long hours discussing Greek with her older tutor. A painter, the painter, might ask a lady to pose just once, and keep that sketch until it softens from his touch, and everywhere, everything is couched in allegory. Want to paint your beloved? You don't say so, you ask to paint Venus and need a model with luminous skin. Wish to send a lover a message. You do it through the gift of a book, its margins annotated with phrases like "this reminded me of your voice" or "I imagine your hands reading this." The world has grown more erotic, yes, but also more encrypted. The church is still powerful, but it's increasingly outmaneuvered by artists. And the artists? They're in love with the body. In Florence, you visit a workshop where a sculptor is chiseling a figure of Apollo, hips twisting, lips parted, thighs curved in a way no saint ever dared be. You ask who commissioned it. He smirks. A bishop. Then taps his nose. Even religion, here, can't quite resist the curve of desire. You pass a tailor's shop where a woman requests a neckline lowered by precisely 2 fingers. Any more, she says, and my husband would notice. The tailor winks. Then it's exactly right. This is an era where flirtation becomes strategy, not sin, and yet, beneath all the courtly flirting and double entendres, people still fall stupidly, clumsily, heart-wrenchingly in love. You see it when a maid forgets herself and brushes her lips to a sailor's hand before it's gloved. When a bookseller finds a poem in a returned volume and reads it so many times the page tears. When a courtesan watches her favorite patron leave without saying goodbye, and turns away too late to hide the tremble. Speaking of courtesans, Venice is famous for them, not prostitutes, not concubines. These are learned women, trained in literature, music, and subtle dominance. They wear jewels at their throats and read Ovid with a sigh. They do not apologize for knowing what they want. You meet one at a salon. She recites a verse she wrote herself: if you want my mouth, earn my mind. If you want my hands, win my laughter. If you want my soul, write me something that hurts. You stay quiet for a long time after that, because here, love isn't about confession, it's about recognition. Not I love you, but I see you. I understand what you've made of your longing. And I choose it. Even the art is full of longing. You walk past frescoes in private chapels where saints look more like exhausted lovers, mouths parted, eyes heavenward, robes sliding off shoulders in poses more intimate than pious. One Madonna holds the infant Christ not like a virgin, but like a woman who's touched softness, grieved loss, and knows exactly what both mean, at a garden wedding. You watch a young bride cry, not from sadness, but from joy so vast she doesn't know where to put it. Her groom just watches her, wordless, holding her hand as though anchoring her to earth. Later that night, someone lights floating candles on the canal. Each flame is said to carry a wish for something unspoken. Some drift. Some sink. The superstition says the ones that sink were the truest, and maybe that's right, because in the Renaissance, love is becoming more self-aware, more playful, more daring. But also, quietly, more fragile. There's a line you overhear in a villa as a painter packs his brushes. She never said she loved me. She just let me draw her hands every morning. And maybe that's the closest thing to certainty this era can offer, not declarations. Not marriages. But moments of permission, to look, to imagine, to remember, and perhaps that's all the Renaissance ever promised, not everlasting love, but the chance to love beautifully, even briefly, not even briefly, but sometimes, brief is enough to haunt a lifetime. You meet a printmaker who once loved a baker's son. She never told him. Not even once. He smelled like honey and flour, she says, brushing flecks of copper off her sleeves. You think that's nothing? Try forgetting it after 30 years. She's never married. Never needed to. Her press clacks all day, her ink runs smooth. But sometimes, just sometimes, she swears she still hears his voice when the bread cart rumbles by at dusk. In Florence, a poet tells you she's in love with a man who doesn't know how to read. So I wrote a poem for his hands, she says. Only for his hands. She doesn't explain what that means. She doesn't need to. Renaissance love, you come to realize, isn't just about union, it's about articulation. The ability to say what's burning inside you, whether it's with a chisel, a lute, or your own silent gaze. You sit in a garden where orange trees bloom under moonlight and two lovers sit beside the fountain. They don't touch. They don't speak. But you know, by the way they look at the water, watching it ripple, then still again, they've shared something more intimate than speech could hold, and sometimes, even scandal becomes poetry. You hear of a woman in Milan whose husband died mysteriously after she began frequenting the studio of a young sculptor. The town gossips about it endlessly, says she wears green velvet now, and never weeps. They say she keeps one of the sculptor's statues in her bedroom, draped modestly except for its eyes. No one knows what really happened. But every poet in Milan has written about her at least once. Because Renaissance love is as much performance as it is passion, you attend a wedding where the bride and groom recite Petrarchan sonnets to each other instead of vows. The priest sighs, the crowd claps, and the bride's father, visibly irritated, says, they'll be begging each other for money in verse by winter. He's probably right. But no one minds. There's a young man in a tavern who sings about a girl who never came to the balcony. She had 100 suitors, he tells you. But none of them ever learned her mother's name. I did. That's how I won. You ask if they married, he pauses. She died before I asked. You look down. He shrugs. Still won. You come across a painted fan in a merchant's stall, ivory ribs. Silk canvas, delicate strokes of red and gold. Along its edge, in barely legible calligraphy, look at me only when they aren't looking at us. You ask the merchant who wrote it, he says, doesn't matter. It's true for everyone. Because Renaissance intimacy wasn't only physical, it was emotional, intellectual, aesthetic. A glance between the right lines of Virgil. A sigh shared over Titian's latest canvas. A hand lingering just a breath too long on a shoulder in a crowded gallery. You pass a school where young women are taught Latin not so they can write theology, but so they can write back, and they do. You read one letter, smuggled out in the hem of a dress, if you come at dusk. Come before the bells. I want you here before the saints start listening. It's unsigned, but it's folded 20 times, creased like it's been reread every night for a month. You walk through a brothel posing as a perfumery, rich walls, candlelight, silk slippers scattered under beds. A woman there hands you a sachet of cloves and says, don't mistake our work for shame. Some people sell ideas. We sell attention. It's harder. You believe her, in this era, everything is polished to look effortless. But nothing is easy, you see it in the eyes of the widow who composes music. At her clavichord each morning, pausing on one discordant note again and again, as if she's arguing with a memory, you hear it in the silence after the lute stops, you feel it in the pages of a book, its margin notes faintly stained with tears, and when you ask an aging painter what the greatest love he ever knew was, he doesn't name a woman. Or a man. Or even a painting, he says, the moment I realized someone remembered my hands. You tilt your head, they'd watched me work, he says. And years later, they said they missed how my thumb bent when I mixed ochre. Not my face. Not my voice. Just that. That's love. And so, you understand, in the Renaissance, to be remembered exactly is the rarest kind of devotion. To have your details known. Your mind admired. Your sorrow recognized, not worshipped. Not idealized, just known. So when the sun rises on your last morning in this city of gondolas and gold-flecked glances, you find yourself walking the edge of the canal, listening to laughter behind shutters, watching lovers nod discreetly as they pass. You don't need to speak, you already know the language. It's painted in ceiling frescoes, it's sewn in sleeve linings, it's tucked between stanzas of verses never published, but memorized. It's the faint trace of someone's scent on a handkerchief folded into a poetry book, and even as the Renaissance marches toward modernity, with its presses and politics and powdered wigs, this kind of love will never disappear. Because it never announces itself, it just lingers, like perfume, like a final note played in a locked room. You step from the sunlit courtyards of the Renaissance into something colder, quieter, and infinitely more constricted. Your shoes click against polished wood now, not marble. The tapestries are heavier. The air, perfumed but dry. Gone are the olive groves and the half-laughed sonnets. Now you're somewhere between reform and repression, corseted not only in clothing but in thought. This is early modern Europe, somewhere between the 16th and 17th centuries. and love, here, has entered a dangerous kind of stillness. You stand in an English manor house where even the wallpaper is judgmental. Lace collars press against necks like theological nooses. The fire crackles, but nobody warms their hands, they're too busy pretending they don't feel anything. Because in this time, romance is dangerous, desire is being classified. Labeled. Condemned. Tracked, the Protestants are furious. The Catholics are furious. The Puritans are inventing whole new forms of fury. And somewhere in the middle, a young maid lowers her gaze and murmurs good morning to a footman she's absolutely not allowed to speak to. That's the temperature now, surveillance masquerading as morality. You sit in a kitchen where women pickle fruit and whisper about Anne Boleyn, that cursed and crowned enigma. One leans in close and says, they say she had 6 fingers. That's how she bewitched him. Another scoffs. It wasn't her fingers. It was her mind. Then they both go quiet. Because in this era, even intelligence in a woman can be seen as a kind of temptation. Something to be burned, or married off, or denied access to libraries. And yet, despite it all, the longing continues. You walk the galleries of a royal court where noblewomen fan themselves slowly, eyes half-lidded, but always watching. The sleeves are puffed, the bodice is tighter than ever, and every flirtation is delivered through coded glances and court dances. A gentleman bows. A lady curtsies. They both know the exact tilt of an ankle says. More than a letter ever could, you watch them dance the volta, a scandalous new step that allows the man to lift the woman, actually lift her, in public. The clergyman gasp. The crowd watches with rapt, half-scandalized delight. Her feet leave the ground for only a moment, but it's enough for her heart to leap, and for everyone in the room to pretend it didn't. In the Netherlands, you meet a painter who obsesses over hands. The neck is poetry, he tells you, but the hands are the truth. You nod, watching as he renders one lover's fingers hovering near, but never touching, the other's wrist, too close, he mutters, and dabs a brushstroke away. You pass a bookbinder's shop and see a volume being covered in tooled leather. On the spine, The Art of Husbandry. Inside, hollowed pages, concealing a note, it says, I do not want salvation if it means forgetting your voice. You tuck the book back, even the philosophers are conflicted. Montaigne writes that love is irrational but necessary. Descartes ignores it completely. Spinoza says desire is a form of understanding. Shakespeare, of course, just puts it all in rhyming iambic pentameter and pretends he's not writing from experience. But someone's always writing from experience. You sit with a woman in a room lined with devotional texts. She opens one and shows you what's hidden inside, a miniature painting, barely larger than your thumb, of a woman embracing another, cheek to cheek. The detail is exquisite. The gesture unmistakable. From my sister, she says. She doesn't mean biological sister. You don't ask more. You don't need to. In this era, love doesn't only hide in margins. Sometimes, it is the margin. And it learns to live there. You overhear a priest confess to a friend that he no longer remembers the sound of laughter without guilt. He once loved someone. He won't say who. Only that every prayer since has tasted like apology. You visit a playhouse in London, where boys play the parts of women and men. Weep openly in the stalls. Romeo and Juliet die nightly to thunderous applause, and the next morning, some mother warns her daughter never to believe in love that quickly, but she did. Once. Before the church came. Before her dowry was sealed. Before anyone explained how to suffer elegantly, you watch a letter being written by candlelight, the ink runs just a little at the corners, someone's tears, not humidity, the words say, I know we are not free. But do not doubt I would have chosen you, even if I had been. The wax seal is pressed with a ring. Not a crest. Just a tiny swan, and by morning, the letter's gone, because in this era, love isn't declared, it's smuggled. Across borders. Between sermons. Beneath wigs. Inside books. Hidden behind euphemisms and fan language and impossibly formal grammar, and when it's caught, it's rewritten. As sin. As scandal. As foolishness, but never forgotten, you stand at the edge of a field, where a man with a scarred hand plants herbs in perfect rows. His wife died years ago. Everyone says he never remarried because he's too simple for politics. But his rosemary beds are shaped like initials. 2 letters. Neither of them his own. You walk into a chapel where the marriage banns are read aloud. Everyone listens solemnly, but someone in the pew scratches something into the wood. She deserved better. Love here doesn't die, it adapts. Quietly. Carefully, it survives inside poems, recipes, handkerchiefs, and glances that never get mapped. It asks for nothing, it gets less than that, but it remains, because even in a world devoted to containment, something in the human heart still spills, like ink. Like wine. Like breath shared behind a closed door, and sometimes, just before the sun sets, someone opens a window, just a crack, enough to let in the sound of someone walking by, enough to let hope pretend it could stay for tea, pretend it could stay for tea, and that pretending, that careful as if, becomes its own survival strategy. In this time, you learn that performance is protection. People perform virtue, perform distance, perform marriages that look pristine from the outside but echo with silence indoors. And through all this posturing, love hides in plain sight, coated in posture, layered in etiquette, folded like a note beneath a linen napkin at supper. You sit with a noble woman who fans herself with the rhythm of an old folk tune. It was the first thing he hummed to me, she says, as if talking about the weather. Her husband sits at the other end of the table, drunk and oblivious. She hums the tune again. Slower this time. You notice her fan is painted not with flowers, but with tiny birds. Swallows. They always return. You walk past a printing house where the apprentice is typesetting a conduct manual for wives. Every paragraph advises obedience, chastity, silence. But you glance at the discarded test pages and see something else, a poem tucked into the corner, to the woman who refuses to bow. It's unsigned. Probably best, because now, even the printed word is dangerous. This is a world of paradoxes. The theater is full of longing. The church is full of fear. Courtships are drawn out with letters that read like chess matches, and everyone is afraid of scandal, but secretly, everyone wants to be the story that people whisper about behind gloves, and so, intimacy becomes small-scale rebellion. You see a woman tuck a lock of someone else's hair into a wooden locket shaped like a pear. He gave me a real one once, she says. I kept the taste in my mouth all summer. The locket doesn't match her dress. It doesn't have to. At a boarding school for noble daughters, you sit beside a girl who is reading Ovid, not the sanitized parts, but the Metamorphoses in its full, unruly form. They want us to memorize the Latin, she says, but not feel it. You ask what she means, she just closes the book and says, he turns Daphne into a tree, and everyone calls it a love story. In a smaller village, you witness a marriage procession where the bride walks with her eyes fixed ahead, lips stiff. The groom looks pleased with himself. The crowd throws herbs, not flowers. You ask someone what the bundle is. Rue, they say. For regret. Later, you see the bride alone, carefully digging a hole in the garden. She drops the rue bundle in, covers it, and walks away barefoot. You don't follow. Some griefs belong to silence, and then, in the city, you meet a man who still wears his dead lover's gloves. They were a gift, he says. He had small hands. You ask how long ago. He doesn't answer. Just lifts one glove to his cheek and nods. Still warm, he whispers. Some nights. Even the weather starts to feel complicit. Rain is when secrets travel. Lovers dart beneath awnings, cloaks pulled over heads, eyes darting sideways to see if they're noticed. They are. But no one says anything. You sit in a pew where a young man kneels beside an older one. They don't touch. They don't look. But the younger leans slightly toward him, and the elder's fingers clench, barely. Then relax. The homily drones on about purity, but the room is pulsing with something else entirely. You visit a widow who grows roses out of season. When you ask how, she grins. My husband planted them. Said they were the only soft thing he ever gave me. You pause, unsure how to respond. She hands you a rose. I prefer the thorns. She says. At least they're honest. And perhaps that's the best definition of love in this era, honesty that dares to hide in disguise. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't ask for understanding. It just needs to survive. One more day, one more gaze, one more folded scrap of paper hidden beneath the biscuit tin. You visit a tailor who embroiders names inside seams, not initials. Whole names. Sometimes they belong to the wearer, he says. Sometimes not. You run your finger over a silk cuff. The thread glimmers gold. She asked for her sister's name in the lining, he adds. Said it made her feel protected. You want to ask more, you don't. Even silence becomes a form of intimacy now. In a dark library, you find a page torn from a prayer book. Not vandalized. Just borrowed. On the back is a drawing of two hands reaching across a table. They don't touch. But the shadow beneath them is drawn in such a way that it almost connects. You smile. You don't tell the librarian, you don't need to, because in this era, the most radical thing you can do is remember. Not what the poets wrote. Not what the priests proclaimed. But what people whispered when they thought no one was listening, what they risked. What they lost. What they dared to love in a world built to extinguish softness. And maybe that's why you keep walking, through houses full of lace and cold porridge, through drawing rooms and parishes and graveyards and libraries, looking not for grand romances, but for the scraps, a dried flower tucked in a recipe book, a name scratched into the underside of a window ledge, a shoe left under the wrong bed, but never returned, because even when everything was designed to contain it, love still spilled, in ink, in sweat. In the exhale that someone remembers. Long after the face has blurred, even here, love keeps bending the rules just enough to breathe, and you notice it, you remember it, and you carry it forward. The air smells like powder and lavender and just the faintest trace of discontent. You open your eyes and you're no longer in manor houses or candlelit courts. You're in a chamber bathed in pale blue silk, somewhere between Versailles and Vienna. Lace trims everything, your sleeves, your collar, even your imagination. This is the 18th century. The age of enlightenment, they call it. But if love were light, this century would be all chandeliers and shadows. Bright salons. Dark corners. Sparkling wit. Unspeakable longing, your shoes click across parquet floors. A powdered wig itches slightly behind your ear. A violin begins to play in the next room, and someone laughs just a bit too loudly. The evening is young, and the masquerade is just beginning, because here, in this gilded century of libertines and lace, love no longer hides under religion or duty, now it hides under wit. Seduction has become an intellectual exercise. People flirt with essays. With footnotes. With exactly how long they can hold eye contact while pretending to debate Rousseau. In one salon, a woman named Clemence passes you a note folded 4 times. It reads, "Voltaire is wrong. But your mouth is not." She doesn't look at you again all night. But she doesn't need to. You've entered a world where the body is still policed, but the mind is rioting in brocade, even the nobility is restless. You're in a drawing room when a countess slaps a fan closed and says, "Monogamy is a virtue for peasants." Someone chokes on their brandy. She shrugs. I married for position. I read for pleasure. I dance for sport. But I love only in the margins. Everyone pretends not to understand, but they do. You walk through Versailles and see servants sweeping away rose petals from a party you weren't invited to, one that ended with 3 scandals, 2 broken teacups, and an unsigned note left under a wig stand. You'll forget my face, but not my voice. It's unsigned. As always, this is a century of fragments. This is a century of fragments, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, a torn sketch of a shoulder, discarded but rescued from the fire, a copy of La Nouvelle Heloise, its corners dog-eared not from study, but from rereading that one paragraph, the one that reminds you of them. You meet a watchmaker in Geneva who carves initials inside the cases of pocket watches, for lovers who can't write letters. The gears may break, he says. But the engraving is forever. Then he hands you one. It ticks unevenly. You open it. I wish time had stopped. The Enlightenment may be about reason. But no one here feels reasonable. You sit beside a duchess who's reading Diderot by candlelight. She turns to you and says, I love that he believes in virtue, but also in pleasure. I love that he confuses the two. She stares at the flame for a long time, then adds, I loved someone like that once. And that's how it is now, love as contradiction. As appetite. As aphorism, you attend a duel, not for honor, but for a woman's letter. The men don't die. One is grazed, the other faints. She tears up the letter afterward and throws the pieces into a fountain, but not before whispering, it wasn't for either of you. You pass a convent, quieter than those of earlier centuries. A nun there keeps a diary of imagined lovers. I invent them, she tells you. Because real ones fade. Fiction is easier to preserve. She writes each of them a farewell letter, even though they never existed. She sleeps well. In London, a man opens a coffeehouse where philosophers argue downstairs while he writes poetry upstairs about his apothecary. She has never kissed me, he says, but I know the shape of her hands when she closes jars. That's enough. He doesn't publish. You hear stories of cross-dressed duels, of women posing as men to live beside their lovers without scrutiny. Sometimes they're found out. Sometimes not. Sometimes they leave only behind a pair of riding boots and a half-burned love poem. It's a century where gender begins to blur and flex, where relationships don't always come with names, just roles people inhabit to survive, and beneath all this powdered civility, you begin to notice something urgent, something aching, because love here is obsessed with mortality. Portraits are painted to freeze someone in time. Lockets hold hair from people already buried. Music is composed for lovers who never hear it performed. Even the letters, so florid, so dense, read like eulogies written before the loss happens. You find one in a drawer in Berlin. It says, we kissed only once. I have recreated it every night for 27 years. There's no reply, but that doesn't mean it wasn't answered. You walk through the gardens of Schönbrunn Palace and see lovers sneaking behind hedges, whispering under pergolas, reaching for each other like vines between bricks. The air smells like lilacs and powdered sugar. One woman leans toward her companion and murmurs, your absence is the only thing I never forget to pack. He doesn't laugh, he just brushes his hand across hers. Barely. Soft as lace, because in this age, love is luxurious, but never simple, it's built into architecture. Curved staircases that never let people ascend together. Mirrors placed just wrong enough to force glances. Parlor seating that allows hands to dangle near, but never quite touch, it's the golden cage. And everyone's dressed for it. You speak with a violinist in Vienna who says, my favorite sonata is in a key no one uses for romance. Too melancholic. Then she plays it for you. Her eyes stay closed. But the room, somehow, seems to lean toward her. Year later, she will dedicate it to someone whose name she never speaks aloud, and perhaps that's the final rule of love in the Enlightenment. say everything except what you truly mean. You can flirt. You can write. You can duel and sigh and recite. But if you actually name what it is, if you dare to say I love you without adornment, without metaphor, without wit, you've broken the illusion, and no one forgives that. You hear the story of a nobleman who did exactly that, said it plainly. To a poet. In public, he was married, of course, so was she, they were exiled separately, but someone kept their letters, and the last one says only, I'd exile myself again, if it meant I could watch you write in the sunlight one more time. And that's all it takes to make the chandelier flicker, just a bit, because this age may wear wigs and drink chocolate and rehearse seduction like a minuet, but underneath it, people still long, they still ache, they still wait in drawing rooms for footsteps that never come, and memorize voices. And write names in dust just to see them shimmer one more time before being wiped away, because no matter how elegant the cage, love is still the bird, and it still sings, even when the window is painted shut, and now, the chandeliers have dimmed. The fans have stilled. The last lace curtain flutters gently in the hush of early dawn. You're no longer in the palace or the convent, the courtyard or the perfumed salon. You're just here, breathing quietly, tucked into soft sheets, listening as the echoes of centuries begin to settle around you like dust, all those whispered confessions, folded notes, shared glances across candlelit tables, they blur into a soft hum, like a lullaby made entirely of memory. No one's watching now. No one's judging. The performance is over, and the masks are finally resting on the dresser. You trace one last thread through the centuries, not of war, or empire, or law, but of longing. Silly, stubborn, beautiful longing. For closeness. For permission. For a hand held beneath the table when no one else is looking. Across time, love found a way. It waited in libraries. It wept into embroidery. It danced one step too close in courtly halls and left fingerprints on forbidden books. It wasn't always fair. It wasn't always safe, but it endured. It waited in libraries. It wept into embroidery. It danced one step too close in courtly halls and left fingerprints on forbidden books. It wasn't always fair. It wasn't always safe, but it endured.